Hey everybody, good morning. Welcome to day, I don't know what it is, of the speaker vote. We are stuck in this perpetual doom loop where we try to figure out whether the Republicans can elect a speaker from their own conference or not. Give me a thumbs up, let me know that you can hear everything, see everything okay, and we will get started on this. Okay, looks like we are good to go. Everybody can see me, hear me, and we will jump into this right now. So again, I believe this is the fourth attempt at a speaker, maybe the first one. I legitimately can't remember that well at this point, but I believe the first, after McCarthy was ousted, we had a few days of Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise. Yesterday, at some point, we had Tom Emmer, who was voted in. 4 hours later, he was voted out, and as the speaker designate of the Republican conference. And now we are stuck with someone named Mike Johnson. Not entirely sure that this is a real person's name. It is the most generic Republican white guy name you could possibly figure out, but here we are. But more importantly, let's talk a little bit about who Mike Johnson is. He is the new speaker designate for the Republican Party. He does seem to have consolidated a good deal of support within the conference, most likely, in my opinion, enough to have that 217 threshold. Let me tell you a little bit about who he is. He voted to steal the 2020 election and disenfranchise millions of voters in the process. He wants to ban abortion nationwide. He's been the co-sponsor of at least 3 different bills to ban abortion nationwide. He opposes the legalization of same-sex marriage, which is apparently a litmus test issue in the Republican Party, because that's the issue that got Tom Emmer kicked out of the speaker designate role as far as Republicans are concerned. He does support Trump's Muslim ban. He opposes marijuana legalization. He represented Donald Trump during the impeachment. He's a Freedom Caucus member. He does have ties to anti-LGBT organizations. He wrote an anti-LGBT bill that was based on Ron DeSantis's, and the New York Times said he was the most important architect of the Electoral College objections. So just a small sampling of who Mike Johnson is, and what this represents is a win for the House Freedom Caucus, and if he's elected speaker today, it will be a complete and total capitulation of these moderates who held strong to some degree when Jim Jordan was the speaker designate during all of those votes. This guy is not different than Jim Jordan. He doesn't have different positions than Jim Jordan. He is Trump through and through. He represents the whole MAGA wing of the Republican Party. Again, has introduced legislation banning abortion nationwide. I believe it was 3 bills. At least 3 bills that would ban abortion nationwide. That's H.R. 8814, protecting pain-capable unborn children from Late-Term Abortions Act, the Heartbeat Protection Act of 2021, and the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. So this guy is as far right as it gets when it comes to anti-abortion legislation. So this is just a small sampling of who Mike Johnson is and what kind of legislation we could expect him to bring to the floor if he is elected speaker. But again, those moderate Republicans, per usual, if they do cross that threshold and ultimately vote for Mike Johnson, it'll show that yet again these people have capitulated to the right wing, to the far right faction of the Republican Party. So all of these Ken Bucks and Don Bacons who, claimed to have wanted to stand for something when they were voting against Jim Jordan, presumably because they know how much of a burden he would be on them, how much of an albatross around their necks he would be, by virtue of nominating someone like Mike Johnson, they would be doing the exact same thing. The only difference is that Mike Johnson, nobody knows who he is. And so he's basically Jim Jordan without the baggage of Jim Jordan, of which there is a lot, without the name recognition of Jim Jordan. And so, yet again, if these moderates do vote for someone like Mike Johnson, it'll show that it was never about Jim Jordan's policies. It was always about just the fact that they don't want to be saddled with Jim Jordan's baggage because people know who he is and he has a bad reputation and he's unpopular, especially in these moderate districts, these swing districts. So they didn't care that Jim Jordan stood for X, Y, and Z because this guy Mike Johnson is the same thing. They just cared that Jim Jordan would reflect poorly on them because of who he is. And so that's what they didn't like. Again, nothing about his extremism. That's all totally fine. They just didn't want to be saddled with Jim Jordan's name ID in their districts. So we'll see what happens. This vote is coming up in only 30 minutes now. For those watching currently, stick around because we will get into what I believe is the fifth day of voting, if I'm not mistaken, by Republicans. And so what we can expect in the next 30 minutes is as soon as the House comes into session, they'll do a quick quorum call where they see how many members are present that day. This will determine what the threshold is for actually voting in a speaker. Most likely it'll be 217. And then we'll have somebody stand up, nominate Mike Johnson for speaker. We'll have a Democrat nominate Hakeem Jeffries, and then we'll get to roll call where we find out how many Republicans are willing to go to bat for this guy, all of his extreme positions included. And again, for those just joining, because a few thousand people have just hopped on here, just to give a quick rundown of who Mike Johnson is, the New York Times called him the most important architect of the Electoral College objections. He wrote anti-LGBT bills in the mold of Ron DeSantis' bills down in Florida. He has ties to anti-LGBT organizations. He wants to end Ukraine aid. He represented Donald Trump during the impeachment. He voted to steal the 2020 election. He wants to ban abortion nationwide. He opposes the legalization of same-sex marriage, supported Donald Trump's Muslim ban, and opposes marijuana legalization. So as extreme right, as far right as you can get on issue after issue after issue, that is who the Republicans have nominated. If the moderate Republicans capitulate and ultimately vote for this guy, it'll just show that they are doing what they've always done, what they always do, which is just cave to the far right wing of the Republican Party. So, by the way, with that said, if you have any questions that you want me to answer, you can go ahead and throw them in the chat. If you're not yet subscribed to this channel, you can just subscribe and that'll allow you to participate in the chat. It does not cost you anything to subscribe to this channel, but it does support me and my work. And if there are live streams, if this does manage to go yet another day, I'll continue to stream it because I'm in this doom loop with everybody here. So if we're all going to suffer, at least I'll live stream it. Could it be that moderates are afraid to speak out due to the threats that they got with Jim Jordan? Perhaps, but here's the thing. If you've already been threatened because of Jim Jordan, then you stood up to Jim Jordan, received all those threats, and then it was for nothing? Like, at least if you've already gotten those threats, make it be for something, I guess would be my thought process on all of this. If you were willing to stand up and endure the suffering that came with abandoning someone like Jim Jordan, then at least make sure it was worth it. At least see this thing through, as opposed to getting the worst of both worlds. So you stand up to Jim Jordan, you get death threats for yourself and your family, and then you just capitulate to the very Jim Jordan wing of the Republican Party, and you get nothing from it. That's my thoughts on these people getting death threats. So we're going for 200 votes for the Republican nominee again. It's going to be 217 most likely. So that'll be the threshold when we start watching this. The quorum call will show us how many Republicans are actually and Democrats are actually present. So that'll determine the threshold for what these Republicans need to get for a speaker. But it'll most likely be 217. Will this new nominee shut the government down, or do you think he would try to keep it open? That is a good question. Based on his positions, I would presume, because obviously they're not answering any questions, and they're certainly not answering the question, do you intend to shut the government down? But based on his far-right positions, I would presume that this is just another hostage taker in the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. So that's what these people do. That's what they do. That's how they operate. And so, yeah, I would absolutely presume that if they didn't get what they wanted, if Mike Johnson didn't get what he wants, if there's some, hostage he needs to take, if he needs to basically exert pressure on the Democrats, then yeah, I don't see any reason why he would hesitate at shutting the government down to get what he wants. Do I think the last 3 weeks of chaos will be a negative for the Republican Party in 2024? That is a good question. My honest opinion on this is that it most likely won't have a big impact. I think that, first of all, the people watching right now, I am eternally grateful for people paying attention to politics in October of an off year. But I don't think that the electorate writ large is paying attention to politics right now. And I certainly don't think that, in a month or 2 months, much less a year from now, people are going to point and say, but remember when you couldn't nominate a speaker, this is why you shouldn't be elected. Like, I don't think any swing voters are watching right now and being like, well, this was it. This was what finally pushed me over the edge. So I don't think that this is going to have a major impact, but I do think that this is going to be one more basically arrow in Democrats' quiver to be able to point to and say, look, the Republicans are steeped in dysfunction. These people do not want to govern. Here's what happened, in October with their seventh attempt to elect a speaker. And I think it's just one more bullet point that we could check off. But in terms of like this having some major impact, I don't believe it will. That's just my own. I wish it would. I wish people would see this and recognize the dysfunction when it's all staring us right in the face. It's just one more bullet point for that. But I don't think that this moment right here is going to be some major electoral windfall for Democrats, some major electoral turning point here. Can the Senate do anything about this? No. This is all on the House to figure out for themselves. This is them in the deep end, and they got to figure out how to swim, and there's no senators that are going to be able to help them here. How many do I predict will vote no? It looks like they've had quite a good showing in their preliminary votes, so this may be it, but it all depends on what the moderate Republicans do here. So it depends what the Ken Bucks and the Don Bacons do here. If they vote for this guy, Mike Johnson, then if we get a couple of those, we'll know pretty soon because Don Bacon is B in the alphabet. So we'll know pretty soon whether they're willing to cave to yet another extremist Republican in their conference. When is the vote? The vote is at 9 o'clock Pacific, noon Eastern. So we've got less than 30 minutes here. We're 25 minutes away. So if you're watching right now, stick around. If you're in line, stay in line. If it only takes one person to vote the speaker out, isn't this all for naught? That's a good question. Presumably, they would pass a different rules package where they eliminate that one vote threshold to vacate the chair. But if they don't, recognize the difference here. Kevin McCarthy was ousted. Kevin McCarthy was ousted by Matt Gaetz, who is part of the far-right faction. So when the far-right faction didn't get what they wanted in this last few weeks, which was they wanted to shut the government down, and Kevin McCarthy committed the cardinal sin of keeping it open, then Matt Gaetz, a House Freedom Caucus member, a far-right member of the Republican conference, stood up, introduced the motion to vacate, and he was ousted. But this would be entirely different because Mike Johnson is a member of that far-right flank of the Republican Party. So there won't be any far-right Republicans who are threatening to take him out because he is of their ilk, right? And so what we would expect to see here in the case that he was ousted would be someone like Don Bacon standing up and voting, introducing a motion to vacate. And that's far less likely because the moderate faction of the Republican Party kind of doesn't have much of a spine. And so the prospect that, they may very well be voting for this guy today. That's a testament to how little of a spine they have. And so the notion that these people are also going to stand up and introduce a motion to vacate and not just capitulate to the MAGA wing of the Republican Party is crazy. This is what they do. They capitulate. They vote for these far-right extremists, and then they don't do anything. They fall in line. And so you won't have the Matt Gaetzes standing up to vacate this guy because he is of the Matt Gaetz faction of the party. And so I think that, they may very well keep that rule, knowing full well that maybe it's a bone they'll throw to the moderates, but the moderates won't use it. The moderates aren't going to stand up and introduce a motion to vacate because they don't have enough of a spine to be able to do that, and they never have. Those people may very well be voting for this guy for speaker, thereby proving how little of a spine they have. Can the president do anything about this? Unfortunately not. No one can do anything about this. The Republicans' responsibility, or the House's responsibility to elect a speaker, is a responsibility of the House and the House alone. So, again, nobody can swoop in and save them. There won't be any white knight here. The Senate can't do anything. The president can't do anything. It is the House Republican Conference's responsibility to figure out how to govern, which apparently is a lot harder than we think. I'm not exactly sure why they tried so hard to get a majority in their conference, because they don't seem to be able or willing to want to use that majority. How many so-called extremist Republicans are there altogether in the House? There are, I mean, it's the vast majority of the party. If you just look at the speaker votes for Jim Jordan, that can give you a pretty good indication. He had between 194 and 200 votes in his conference. There were 217 that he needed. So there are anywhere between 195 and 200 extremist Republicans. Then I guess that would leave about 17 moderates. So I don't know, what does that work out to? 8%, 7% of the Republican conference is not extreme. And yet we'll see what those people are willing to do today. There may very well be all the votes in the entire country. They may be united today in terms of these votes. And then we would see that really there are no moderates left in the Republican conference. Maybe the only reason that they rejected Jim Jordan was because he has baggage. But because Mike Johnson, nobody knows who he is, and yet he's still just as extreme as Jim Jordan, maybe it's just not the extremism, maybe it's just the name ID. They didn't want to be saddled by Jim Jordan's poor name ID. Are we still looking at 20 present votes from Republicans to give Jeffries a chance to be Speaker? It does depend on how many are present in the quorum call, but for every 2 votes present, we'll lower the threshold by 1. So if Jeffries has, again, it depends how many Democrats are there, but let's say there's 213 Democrats, then you would need, for 8 Republicans voting present to bring that threshold down from 217 to 213. Unlikely that we'll be looking at any possibility that enough Republicans will vote present to give Jeffries the votes that he would need to become Speaker. I think more likely they'll just keep voting for other Republicans as opposed to voting present and lowering that threshold. Again, another similar question: are there enough moderate Republicans now that might join Democrats in electing an independent Speaker? I know it's not the Democrats' responsibility, but it is their opportunity. No, I don't think that any moderates are going to... I mean, here's what would happen. If a moderate voted for Hakeem Jeffries, it would basically be them saying that they're perfectly willing and able to no longer be part of the Republican conference. That will get you excommunicated from the conference. You can vote for McCarthy, you can vote for Scalise or Emmer, you can vote for Donald Trump, you can vote for anyone other than a Democrat as far as these Republicans are concerned. So I think that these people going out and putting their neck on the line and voting for Hakeem Jeffries, you might get one, but I mean it would just turn them into a pariah in the Republican Party anyway. So no, I don't think that there's going to be any chance that you'll have even a single Republican, as moderate as they may be, as frustrated with this process as they may be, who would vote to do that. We heard rumblings of maybe Republicans coming around and supporting some type of interim speakership by Patrick McHenry. That could possibly still be on the table, depending on whether or not Mike Johnson can get the votes that he needs. But again, I think it is almost impossible, as close to impossible as we can get, that we would see any Republicans defect and vote for Hakeem Jeffries. Regarding excommunication from the Republican conference, that's a bad thing. Why? I mean, these people are presumably there just to keep their jobs. I mean, that does seem to be the number one guiding principle among these Republicans. Look, there are people who recognize that what the vast majority of their conference is doing is anti-democratic, is generally bad, but they continue to stay in this conference. They continue to spout the party lines because they want to keep their jobs. That's it. At the end of the day, that's what they're looking to do. They'll glom on to Donald Trump because they recognize that without doing so, they're going to get primaried by someone who will. Why do you think all of these people eventually just toe the party line and grovel at Donald Trump's feet and spout all the Donald Trump platitudes and say everything about Donald Trump that all the other Republicans do? Because they know that if they don't, they will lose their jobs. That's how strongly they want to hold on to their seats. They're willing to kowtow to the rantings and ravings of a deranged narcissistic lunatic. That's how strongly they want to keep their seats. And so, no, there's nothing that these people won't do to eventually avoid a primary. That is their first, second, and third priority. For those wondering how we got here with Mike Johnson, a lot happened yesterday. So Tom Emmer was the Republican designate, the speaker designate. That lasted all of 4 hours before Donald Trump came out and called him a rhino, which is a Republican in name only, RINO. That led to a giant falling off in terms of Tom Emmer. Tom Emmer's whole fall from grace. The MAGA wing of the Republican Party said that there's no way they're going to vote for him. So recognizing that there was no hope for Tom Emmer actually getting elected speaker, they dropped him. They did another vote. A bunch of MAGA Republicans ran this time. I don't even think for the second vote yesterday there were any moderate Republicans. I think it was entirely composed of MAGA Republicans. Mike Johnson eventually won because I guess he has little enough name ID that he didn't have as much baggage as someone like Jim Jordan. Mike Johnson won. He got the seal of approval from Donald Trump, and of course that's the person that all of the Republican conference is looking toward because they're all afraid of him. And that leads us to where we are right now, which is 15 minutes away here from the House gaveling into session and voting on Mike Johnson to be their next speaker. There's a suggestion by McCarthy to put him back as the speaker with Jim Jordan as his assistant. What would that mean in terms of Jordan's influence? I keep thinking, I laugh whenever I see this because I keep thinking about The Office, where Dwight Schrute claims to be the assistant regional manager, and they're like, no, he's the assistant to the regional manager, and that's what Jim Jordan would be, the assistant to the regional speaker. In terms of Jordan's influence, look, I think Kevin McCarthy is so desperate to have his name on the door to the speaker's office that he will do damn near anything to make that possible. So if it means having Jordan be the assistant to the speaker, then he'll gladly do that. What would Jordan's influence be? Probably a lot. I mean, the MAGA wing of the Republican Party has a ton of influence because Kevin McCarthy agreed to give it to them, to hand that influence over. I mean, look, he's able to be vacated with a single vote from one of these people. If that doesn't show you the influence that these MAGA Republicans at the far right flank of the Republican Party has, nothing will. So there's nothing that Kevin McCarthy wouldn't be willing to give up to get back into his position as speaker, even if it meant that Jordan is basically, the shadow speaker in effect, because there's no way that the Kevin McCarthy flank could really control the MAGA flank. And so if that meant that Jim Jordan was his assistant or second in command, really what that would show is that he ran the show, because Kevin McCarthy can't do anything. He's paralyzed without the MAGA flank of his conference, because these people have capitulated so much that they know the MAGA flank can do anything, can get anything it wants, because the moderates are spineless. And by the way, if you need proof that the moderates are spineless, go watch what happens in about 15 minutes when it comes time for these moderates to actually vote for Mike Johnson. Again, I'll be pleasantly surprised if that's not what happens, if they are able to stand up against Mike Johnson, who, by the way, for those just joining, is someone who was the co-sponsor of at least 3 bills that would ban abortion nationally, someone who the New York Times called the most important architect of the Electoral College objection, someone who has ties to anti-LGBT organizations, someone who wants to end Ukraine aid, someone who represented Donald Trump during his impeachment, someone who opposes the legalization of same-sex marriage, who supported Donald Trump's Muslim ban, who opposes marijuana legalization. So again, someone who voted to steal the 2020 election, most importantly. So again, if we're looking for someone who is as far right as it gets, it is Mike Johnson. So we'll see what that flank of the party is willing to do to stand up for him, but my hopes aren't very high. I don't really have high expectations. Let's see here if we have any feed yet. So far, no feed. So as soon as we have anything that will show where we're at, here's what we can do. Let's try this. Just pulling up our feed here. Okay. So we are less than 20 minutes away. We're about almost 10 minutes away from the House coming into session here. So as soon as we have any movement from the chamber, we'll go full on that screen here. And by the way, if you do have any questions, you can just throw them in the chat. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, make sure to subscribe. Then you can participate in the chat. You can throw questions, and you can also stay on top of these live streams. And if you don't think it's important to stay on top of these live streams, I believe we're day 5 into this speaker vote. So I've been live streaming the entire thing. I'll continue to live stream anyway, everything that happens until we are out of this doom loop that is Republicans trying to do their bare minimum and elect a speaker from their own majority, from their own conference. Are there any Democrats willing to vote for a Republican speaker? No. Again, I don't think we're going to see any defecting from one party to the other. I think that's a good way to make yourself a pariah within your party. So no, I don't think we're certainly not going to see any Democrats. Democrats have been united throughout this entire process behind Hakeem Jeffries. A lot of people have been asking whether there's any likelihood that we could see any Republicans get fed up and defect for Hakeem Jeffries. Again, I think that is the easiest way to lose your seat in Congress. I mean, presumably, if you're going to do that, that's basically saying this will be my last term serving. And it might be the last thing they do, and it might be one final stand they want to take. It seems like not the best hill to die on, like just choosing a speaker, but basically it's confirming, it's guaranteeing that these people will be primaried by someone who's farther right, and that they'll lose their jobs. Because, I mean, again, it's not the general election electorate who's going to determine whether the Don Bacons or Ken Bucks or any of these other moderates stay in their seats. It's going to be the primary voters who have to determine whether they can even get to the general election. So if a Don Bacon, for example, and I use him because he's just more moderate than the rest, if a Don Bacon comes forward and says, if we can't figure it out, I'm going to vote for Hakeem Jeffries, that's fine. And he could very well do it. He likely wouldn't even have enough other Republican colleagues to defect to even make it worth it. But he can do that, and then they'll just say, great, hope it was worth it. We're going to primary you with somebody right now. And the primary voters are way farther to right than the general election voters. And so he would just be primaried. He would lose his seat, and that's it. That's the end of his congressional career. So for these people, it is not worth it for them to do anything that's going to endanger their seat. And so instead, they'll just toe the line because they're afraid of losing their jobs. None of this is about principle or values or democracy or any of the other platitudes they crow about. It is about keeping their jobs, period. That's it. That's the whole ball game. A lot of people are asking, can Biden or the Senate influence the speakership at all? Can they install somebody? No. This is just up to the Republican majority or the House unto itself to figure out a speaker. So we won't see anything. We won't see anything in the realm of Joe Biden coming in and trying to install a speaker. We won't see the Senate coming to swoop in. This is on Republicans themselves in the House, and the House. It's up to the House itself and the House majority, more specifically, to figure out how to nominate a speaker unto themselves, or elect a speaker, I should say, unto themselves. They've nominated quite a few: Steve Scalise, Jim Jordan, Tom Emmer, now Mike Johnson, whose name I will probably never remember. I mean, it is the most generic. I don't know that this guy I had never seen Mike Johnson before. But again, for those joining, just to give a quick overview of who Mike Johnson is, if you were wondering where he stands on the issues, he voted to steal the 2020 election, wants to ban abortion nationwide. He's co-sponsored at least 3 bills thus far to do that, opposes the legalization of same-sex marriage. He opposes marijuana legalization. He supported Donald Trump's Muslim ban. So this should give you an idea of just how extreme Mike Johnson is. I agree voting for Jeffries. This is another question. By the way, if you want to add a question to the chat, just subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything to be able to do that. I agree voting for Jeffries is political suicide, but can any Republican survive voting present? Can they survive not showing up? I mean, here's the thing. If enough Republicans do that, it is the same as basically handing Jeffries the speakership. So they're acutely aware of the fact that if they do vote present to any degree that could actually have any impact, then it's basically the same thing. Like if you have 10 Republicans who show up and vote present, then you're going to basically have 10 Republicans who've done their job to allow Hakeem Jeffries to become speaker. And these Republicans know that. And the attacks will begin instantly. I mean, you've never seen someone's job in danger faster than when Republicans want you out of their own conference. And I would point you back to Madison Cawthorn. Once Madison Cawthorn started talking about being invited to orgies within the Republican Party, his half-life in the GOP was down to like 5 minutes. I mean, there was more opposition research that came out on a daily basis against him than any Democrat who these Republicans have ever contended with. So if Republicans want you out of their conference, if they see that you threaten them from within, you are a dead man walking. And that's what would happen to any of these Republicans who did kind of collude to vote present to such a degree that it would actually have the impact of making Hakeem Jeffries speaker. So, if they don't show up, if they vote present, if they do anything that's going to help Hakeem Jeffries become speaker to any degree that matters, which means if we have enough of them, then it's going to be just as bad. And the Republicans will attack like they've never done before. Shouldn't there be some rule that if the majority can't elect the speaker after so many days, the minority takes control by default? I mean, I don't know that there would be a rule. I mean, look, the only job right now is just to elect a speaker. I mean, the rule here is just that the only order of business is it's just you have to find somebody who can get 217 votes. So there's no rule that the majority has to elect a speaker. The only rule is that somebody has to get 217. So the majority can vote for a Democrat. There's no rule saying they can't. I mean, again, if a number of Republicans voted for Hakeem Jeffries would become speaker. So there's not any rule that says the majority has to elect somebody from their own party. There's just a rule that somebody has to reach that threshold to become speaker, which is going to be 218 or 217, depending on how many people are present. Here, in this case, I think it'll be 217. But there is no control. It's just finding somebody who can get the votes. That's it. If that person happens to be a Democrat, fine. If that person happens to be a Republican, fine. If that person happens to be some independent who's not even in Congress, that is okay. It doesn't have to be somebody who's currently serving, by the way. But it's just a matter of like getting 217 people, and the only party that has that many people are the Republicans, of getting 217 people to agree on one person, which apparently seems impossible. And again, a number of people have pointed this out on the chat as well, but like this is the bare minimum. This is the bare minimum of what they're supposed to be doing right now. We're not talking about rewriting the tax code here. We're not talking about acing the exam. We're talking about writing your name on the top of the piece of paper. That's it. This is just electing a speaker. This is just the bare minimum. This is day one stuff. And we are a year in to the Republicans' majority in the House, and we don't know like how to get anything else moved because they can't even land on someone who's going to be able to bring legislation to the floor. For those just joining, we are just a few minutes away from the House coming into session here. So what we can expect in the next few minutes is this feed to begin. People will start filtering into the chamber. They'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. They'll do a prayer, which we don't have to watch. And from there, they'll do a quorum call so that we can figure out how many members are actually present. That'll determine the threshold that we need to actually elect a speaker. Most likely, it'll be 217 votes. From there, someone will stand up, nominate Mike Johnson from the Republican side. Someone will nominate Hakeem Jeffries from the Democratic side, and we'll get into voting. Remember, the last time that Republicans had a speaker designate on the floor for a vote was Jim Jordan. He went 3 rounds. He got 200 votes. Then he got, I believe, 198, and then he got 194. So there were enough Republicans then, moderate Republicans, to kind of keep the speakership out of the hands of a far-right Republican. Mike Johnson is just as far right as Jim Jordan. It remains to be seen whether those same moderate Republicans can kind of stay united in their opposition to having somebody from the far right flank of their party lead them, or if they do what I think we would expect them to do, which is ultimately just to capitulate to the far right flank of that party and allow someone as extreme as Mike Johnson to become speaker. So we'll see what happens on that front, and we'll see in just a few minutes here. What does having a far-right MAGA Republican mean for certifying the 2024 election, assuming Joe Biden wins? I mean, look, we've seen it before. If there are objections in the House and the Senate, then they can keep this process in turmoil. I mean, it happened with Arizona. It happened with I believe, what were the 2 states that Mike Johnson himself, Pennsylvania. So, they can do a lot of damage in terms of refusing to certify the election, in terms of standing people up to object to the results, in terms of sowing a lot of distrust. So that is one of the major obstacles. That's one of the major concerns about having one of these far right Republicans who are just completely and totally loyal to Donald Trump be in this position of power. By the way, for those just joining right now, thank you for joining. We are basically moments away from the House coming into session, so if you're watching right now, make sure to stick around because any minute now, as soon as we get a live feed from the House, we'll go full screen on that. Again, moments away for those just joining. We are moments away from the House coming into session here, and then we'll see. The first thing that we'll see is a quorum call to determine what the threshold is to actually elect a speaker, and then we'll get into the nominations. So if you're here, stick around. If you're in line, stay in line, and we'll get this thing going. By the way, if you have questions, you can throw them in the chat. All you have to do to be able to participate in the chat at all is to subscribe to this channel. Again, does not cost you anything. Best way to support what I do. Even if you don't want to participate in the chat, if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. It's the best way to support my work. It's the best way to support these continued live streams. We've held these live streams every day of the speaker election here, and we'll continue to do so as long as we're stuck in this doom loop. So thank you for doing that, by the way. I appreciate it. Another question, if Jeffries was elected speaker, couldn't the Republicans immediately remove him based on the House rules? I mean, yeah, there's still a one-member motion to vacate. Anybody could be removed until they change those rules. Anybody can be removed just based on one member of the House coming up and introducing that motion to vacate. So we're not going to go, I'm not going to turn the audio on for this yet because right now it's just C-SPAN taking calls from listeners. And that generally, while entertaining, is probably not going to give you a ton of useful information here. Can you address why the Democrats wouldn't nominate an independent consensus speaker instead? Vote as 212 as a block, and then you only need a handful of moderate Republicans. So the reason that this won't happen is because the Democrats have one job. Well, every party in the House has one job, and that is to elect a speaker from their own party. That's it. Coming out and voting for someone else who's not a Democrat would basically be doing the Republicans' job for them. Democrats don't need to swoop in and save Republicans from themselves. Republicans campaigned for a House majority. They ostensibly wanted a House majority. They've got a House majority. It is up to them and them alone, unto themselves, to elect a speaker from their own party. If they can't do that, it is not the Democrats' responsibility to swoop in and save them from themselves. They wanted to be able to govern. It is their responsibility now to be able to figure out how to do that. I get that it's annoying for the Democrats, and by the way, we have this this feed now, so we'll bring some audio up.
The House will come to order.
The prayer will be offered by guest chaplain Reverend.
All right, so they're just doing the prayer right now, and then they're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Anyway, it is not the Democrats' responsibility to save Republicans. I get that with all the dysfunction right now, it would kind of benefit the Democrats not to have someone as extreme as Mike Johnson or Jim Jordan, for example. But again, that would basically be coming in and saying, look, you couldn't do it. Now we have to swoop in and save you. The Republicans own every political mistake that they make. If they want to nominate Jim Jordan, they own that mistake. If they want to try to nominate Mike Johnson, they own that. But it is not up to the Democrats to figure out how the Republicans can govern. It's not up to the Democrats to choose some Republican who's more palatable or less palatable than somebody else. The Democrats are united behind their candidate. If Republicans can't land on a candidate who they want to choose, then they can always choose Hakeem Jeffries, because one party is completely united behind their candidate. So that's up to them. That's their responsibility. But again, it wouldn't, it can't be the Democrats' responsibility to swoop in and save Republicans from the fact that they can't govern.
Approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be offered today by the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Newhouse.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 7 of Rule 20, I move a call of the House.
Under Clause 7B of Rule 20, the chair confers recognition for that purpose. Without objection, a call of the House is ordered. Members will record their presence by electronic device.
So, right now, we are in a quorum call. So they should put 15 minutes on the clock, I believe.
And so it begins. The first
members will have 15 minutes to vote, that they're present, and then this way we'll know how many members are present, and we'll know what the threshold is for how many members of Congress to elect a speaker.
Count. Each of the representatives being called by their last name, standing up and saying who they will support as the next Speaker of the House.
Okay. With that said, we'll stick around here. We've got about 15 minutes of a quorum call. Hopefully this goes quickly. I know there have been some instances where we've waited for like 20, 30 minutes because there were like two stragglers who never made it into the chamber there. But they'll start this quorum call. We'll figure out how many members are present. We'll figure out what the threshold is to elect a speaker. And then the next thing that happens here is the roll call begins, and we figure out how many Republicans are going to vote for this guy, Mike Johnson, who is the new speaker designate. For those just joining, to give you a little bit of background on who Mike Johnson is, besides someone who I've literally never heard of before. He voted to steal the 2020 election. The New York Times called him the most important architect of the Electoral College objections. He introduced 3 bills at least to ban abortion nationwide. He supports opposes the legalization of same-sex marriage. He supported Donald Trump's Muslim ban. He opposes marijuana legalization. He is a member of the House Freedom Caucus. He wants to end Ukraine aid, and he represented Trump during his impeachment. So just a small sampling of who Mike Johnson is, and that will be the Republicans' choice for their speaker selection as we move forward here. Could bring up some volume on this reporter.
Multiple people that voted present in the room are now planning on voting for him on the floor. That includes Thomas Massey of Kentucky, French Hill of Arkansas, who voted president, and now they're going to be voting for him on the floor. They're supporting him, and so that really shows that he might very well become speaker on this first ballot because there's not really much public opposition. I mean, Mike Lawler, a Republican from New York, a moderate Republican, voted for him in the room, so he would support Mike Johnson on the floor. And he was one of the moderate members that opposed Jordan on all three ballots. So this is really kind of looking good for Mike Johnson. And now there might be some people who are just not making their position known, but that does not seem very likely right now.
Is there a
By the way, just on this issue of why a moderate Republican would oppose Jim Jordan and yet opt to vote in favor of someone like Mike Johnson, it's not because of the positions that they espouse, clearly, because if you're willing to oppose Jim Jordan on his stances on the issues, but then vote for someone like Mike Johnson who has the same stances on those issues, it clearly wasn't about the issues themselves. It was about the candidate. It was about the baggage that Jim Jordan has. So when you have, these moderate Republicans who stood firm and held together against Jim Jordan, it wasn't about the fact that he was too far right or that he was extreme. It was about the fact that it was Jim Jordan and he has baggage. And these people didn't want to go back to their districts and say, vote for me so that we can empower Speaker Jim Jordan. That's it. They don't care about the issues. They just care about the fact that they didn't want to be associated with somebody who was as unpopular, who was as extreme as Jim Jordan was. But Mike Johnson is just as extreme on the issues. He just has poor name ID. And so it's not the issues that they care about. It's not his positions that they care about. It's not the fact that he's an extremist that they care about. It's just the fact that they don't want to be associated with someone like Jim Jordan. And eventually, if Mike Johnson becomes speaker and he has just as bad a reputation as Jim Jordan does, then we'll be in the same boat. But for right now, it's about hoodwinking their base, because they know that they can't be associated with Speaker Jim Jordan, but Speaker Mike Johnson, who nobody knows who the hell he is, sure, that's no problem. Yeah, he's just as extreme as Jim Jordan, but nobody knows that he had some sex scandal at OSU. Nobody knows that he's like a lackey for Donald Trump. Nobody knows that he's a flame-throwing chair of the Judiciary Committee. So again, it is not about the fact that these people are extremists. It's just about the fact that they're trying to protect themselves in their own district. So if we see these moderate Republicans like Mike Lawler, like Ken Buck, like Don Bacon come forward and support Mike Johnson, I forget his name before I say it every single time. If we see them come forward and support someone like him, then it goes to show that it's not about the issues. It's not about the fact that they're extremists. It's not about the fact that that he voted to overturn the election results. It's not about the fact that he refused to certify the election. It's not about the fact that he's supporting a nationwide ban on abortion. All of that's fine. They just don't want to be associated with someone like Jim Jordan. That's it. It's just about protecting themselves in their next election. That's it. It's not about protecting you from extremism. It is about protecting themselves from a primary challenge. And they know that the best way to be able to do that is to avoid being, to avoid being a pariah in the Republican Party by refusing to vote for another extremist.
Really is smart on policy. But then you're also going to see him have to lean on people like McCarthy, people like Emmer and Scalise for the more political side, kind of learning how to wrangle the conference together. I think that is going to be a learning curve, and it's going to be hard, especially in this narrow majority that you see. People are okay with blocking whatever comes to the floor, whatever bill comes to the floor that they don't like, and they want everything they want or nothing at all. So I think it is definitely going to be hard to go straight into this position.
Uh-oh.
At Amazon Freight, we know the only thing better than having a friend with a truck is having a friend with a bigger truck. And then on demand.
Jim Jordan lost to Scalise. The second thing is the context there matters. That video clip is coming right outside the courtroom where Donald Trump and the Trump organization really is on trial for fraud in a criminal fraud trial. But he is clearly the leader of the Republican Party. He is the front runner, and he absolutely had the ability to sink Tom Emmer in the fact that he wasn't outspoken for Kevin McCarthy. He wasn't making calls before the vote on the motion to vacate, I think was ultimately devastating. If Trump had tried to save McCarthy, I think he might have been able to.
All right, let's go to Mariana Sotomayor. She covers the House of Representatives for the Washington Post and joins us now from Capitol Hill. Mariana, good afternoon. Talk to us about how Congressman Johnson got himself into this position.
Yeah, it's been a very quick rise for him. He currently serves as the vice chairman of the Republican Conference, but he's actually always had bigger ambitions. He has stayed as vice chair, but he actually did want to run for conference chair several years ago when that position opened up, when Republicans notably removed Liz Cheney from that position. But Republicans, at that time knew it was important to have a woman in some part of leadership. So that's where you saw Elise Stefanik actually take that conference chair position. And Mike Johnson took a step back. He decided not to run for that position because he knew that where his Republican colleagues lied. But, because he's been in leadership, even though it's in a much smaller role, he does have relationships around the conference across the ideological spectrum of thought that exists, and as we have seen, has become very fractured throughout the year. It'll be interesting to see, though, how he continues to bring those different groups of thoughts together, because he necessarily has not been tested. He has not been in the spotlight in any way that, would even nationally, I should say, he hasn't even been in the spotlight. So it'll be completely interesting to see this new person, this fresh face that even some senators are remarking, they don't know who it is, how he will lead in this new kind of generation of Republican leadership.
So, Mariana, describe what the atmosphere...
Okay, by the way, for anybody just joining, just to give a quick overview of who Mike Johnson is, because a lot of people don't know who he is here. I should say, for those just joining right now, they're in the middle of a quorum call, so this will determine, there's about 15 minutes from when this call was first started, which was quite a few minutes ago. We'll determine how many members are present and then what the threshold is for electing a new speaker. And by the way, in the meantime, if you want to ask questions, just throw them in the chat. All you have to do is subscribe to this channel to be able to participate in the chat. But just to give you a quick overview on who Mike Johnson is, his position is we need to cut Medicare and Social Security. He wants to cut earned benefits. He's looking to introduce at least 3 bills to ban abortion nationwide. He refused to vote to certify the election results. He opposes the legalization of same-sex marriage, which was the litmus test for Tom Emmer. It's why Tom Emmer is no longer the candidate for Republicans. Opposes marijuana legalization, supported Donald Trump's Muslim ban. The New York Times called him the most important architect of the Electoral College objections. He's written anti-LGBT bills in the mold of what Ron DeSantis has down in Florida and wants to end Ukraine aid. So on issue after issue after issue, this guy Mike Johnson is as extreme as it gets for these Republicans. And so what will be interesting here to see is whether these self-proclaimed moderates, the Ken Bucks and the Don Bacons and the Mike Lawlers, actually defect and vote for Mike Johnson when he's up for, the speaker election in just a few minutes now, on the same grounds that they refuse to vote for Jim Jordan because of his policies. Ostensibly, Mike Johnson has the same exact policies. And so it will become apparent that it wasn't the stances on his positions that really mattered. It was just the fact that they didn't want to support someone like Jim Jordan because he has high name ID and he has baggage and he would be an albatross around their necks. But Mike Johnson is just as extreme as Jim Jordan on all of these members, which, by the way, is why he'll garner the support of all of these Republican holdouts who were refusing to vote for, someone like Kevin McCarthy or Tom Emmer. But then what remains to be seen is whether the moderates will actually be willing to stomach him. And if they do, I guess it wouldn't be much of a surprise because it would show that, per usual, those moderates are the ones without a spine. It's the moderates who will eventually and ultimately capitulate to the extremist flank of their party. And then they turn around and say, why does everybody think that we're all like Marjorie Taylor Greene? Even though every action they take is just to empower people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. So what you're looking at right now is the quorum on the House. This is basically roll call to see how many members are present. Right now, 228, 229 members are present. That NV is not voting. It's not people who haven't voted yet. That number will continue to slink down to maybe just one or two at the end of this. So as members continue to filter into the House, I believe you can't see because the chyron is at the bottom of the screen, but I believe it says there are about 9 minutes left in the roll call here. So if you're watching right now, just stick around, because what we can expect to see immediately after this roll call, and again, you see this number on not voting just continuing to tick down. What we can expect to see immediately after this roll call is speaker nomination. So a Republican will stand up and basically nominate Mike Johnson, who is the speaker designate for the GOP. A Democrat will stand up and nominate Hakeem Jeffries, who, as always, is the speaker choice for Democrats, and then the voting will begin. And there is a lot of optimism on the Republican side that Mike Johnson will have the votes that he needs to become speaker on the first round. It, again, will be interesting to see what these moderates do, because the same moderates who prevented Jim Jordan from becoming speaker by making sure that he didn't ever pass that 200 vote threshold, if they're going to defect and ultimately vote for Mike Johnson, it'll show that it was never about his stances, his extreme position on these issues. It was just about the fact that they didn't want to be associated with a speaker, Jim Jordan. They didn't want to go back to their districts and say, hey, vote for me as your member of Congress so that I can be led by Jim Jordan. I should ask, too, it looks like we are just a few minutes away here from starting. It says that there is about a minute left in this roll call. It usually takes about 5 to 10 minutes beyond that. So you can see that there's less than a minute right now. There's still 170 or so members who haven't voted present, although that number is ticking down pretty quickly. But that's what we can expect to see right now in terms of the roll call in the House. Just a few minutes from now, as soon as this roll call is done, we'll know the threshold for electing a speaker. And from there, we can go ahead and get into these votes. So if you're watching right now, we're a few minutes away from this vote starting in earnest, and that'll be for Mike Johnson for speaker, as we're on, I believe, the fifth ballot, the fifth attempt by Republicans to nominate someone. So stick around. And by the way, for anybody watching right now, to support what I do, to support this live stream, please subscribe to this channel. It is completely free, but it supports what I do. It supports these live streams as I continue to broadcast everything in terms of the speaker election. We've been going for what feels like an eternity right now, stuck in this doom loop that is trying to figure out who the Republican speaker is going to be. You can also stay on top of my regular breaking news videos as well as interviews. A couple of weeks ago, I interviewed AOC. This past week was Jamie Raskin. And I also have a legal series called The Legal Breakdown with Glenn Kirshner, where we cover everything that's going on from a legal perspective, especially in terms of Donald Trump's prosecutions. And finally, a series called Democracy Watch with Mark Elias, where we cover everything related to gerrymandered maps and the lawsuits that are challenging them, and how many seats we can see in Democrats' favor because of illegal Republican maps being overturned. Someone just asked, I sound more sure that this vote will pass. Why? Because they've done preliminary votes within the House Republican Conference to see how much support Mike Johnson would have, and he did garner more support than most people. He's also had a few of the Republican holdouts come forward even today. Somebody like French Hill, for example, who's a Republican member of Congress, who didn't vote to support Mike Johnson yesterday, who's come out and said that he does have my support. So I do think that we're likely to see more support for Mike Johnson here. Whether he can get it on the first ballot remains to be seen. Whether he does have the support of these self-proclaimed moderates, given his extremist positions, also remains to be seen. But a number of those Republicans have already come out and said that they're willing to vote for him, including someone like Mike Lawler, for example, who is a self-proclaimed moderate from New York, who then would come out and say that he's willing to vote for a guy like Mike Johnson, who, again, wants to ban abortion nationwide, who voted to overturn the last election, who was an architect of Donald Trump's election certification, and on and on. So if you're looking right now, officially, the quorum call is over. We still have just over 120 members of Congress who haven't yet voted. That number continues to tick down as these members filter their way into the House. So we are just a few minutes away from this speaker vote beginning in earnest. So if you're watching right now, stick around. If you're in line, stay in line, and we'll get this thing going in just a few minutes here. And by the way, if you want to throw any questions in the chat, you can throw some questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them.
A different complexion of the Republican conference in 2025. And, if, for example, Republicans lost the majority and they're in the minority, maybe Johnson gets voted out and one of them does get a chance to come in. You have to sort of be a team player, because if you're ambitious, then you're thinking 15 months ahead.
Okay, so we're getting some questions here, so let me answer some questions in the meantime as we wait for this roll call vote. Again, we're just waiting on the roll call vote to be completed, and the very next thing that we can expect to happen is the actual speaker vote itself. So if you're watching right now, stick around. We have around 100 members who haven't voted yet, 320 who have, and that number is whittling down pretty quickly. So as members continue to filter in, we'll get this thing going. Again, we should be in the double digits now any second, and there we go. So again, we're just a few minutes away from this speaker vote beginning in earnest now. How long did Democrats take to elect Speaker Pelosi? I believe it was on the first ballot. And now they voted for Hakeem Jeffries, I believe, 18 times in a row, as Republicans have been mired in these votes, between 15 with Kevin McCarthy, 3 with Jim Jordan, and they'll continue to vote in unison for Hakeem Jeffries. Do the Democrats have a chance to win back the House in 2024? Absolutely. Here's why. Democrats absolutely have a chance to win back the House in 2024 for 2 reasons. And again, if you subscribe to this channel, you can stay on top of the Democracy Watch series, where we talk about this exact issue of correcting illegally gerrymandered maps. So right now, just on fixed gerrymandered maps alone, and that is in Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, possibly Texas if they can get the lawsuits done in time, South Carolina, Utah, North Carolina, and New York. North Carolina in the wrong direction, by the way. These will be new gerrymanders for Republicans. But between all of those change maps that we can expect to see ahead of 2024, we can expect anywhere from 11 to 15 seats for Democrats. And that's because we're going to see a new black opportunity district in Alabama because of the Supreme Court case Allen versus Milligan, a new black opportunity district in Louisiana. We're going to see a new one in Georgia. We're going to see, as the result of illegally gerrymandered cases because of the 14th Amendment, we're going to see new maps in possibly South Carolina, Utah. Florida's 5th Congressional District is another one that'll be a flip for the Democrats, and 4 to 6 seats for the Democrats in New York because of that gerrymander, and possibly 3 to 5 seats in Texas, although again, we're not certain that that lawsuit will be done in time for 2024. But 11 to 15 seats just based on correcting gerrymandered maps. So that is good news for the Democrats in terms of fixing a lot of those illegal gerrymanders. But then beyond that, there are currently 18 Republicans sitting in Biden-won districts. So if we see today, for example, that a bunch of moderate Republicans are coming forward, or self-proclaimed moderates are coming forward and voting for someone like Mike Johnson here, who refused to certify the election results, who was the architect of Donald Trump's whole electoral count scheme, who introduced at least 3 bills to ban abortion nationwide, who opposes same-sex marriage. Somebody as extreme as that can be a pretty big albatross around Republicans' necks as they go back to their districts that Biden won in 2020. So between the 11 to 15 seats that are being corrected as the result of illegal gerrymanders and the fact that Republicans are on defense in a vast majority of these states, we could see flips of up to 30 seats in the House. So I'm super bullish on Democrats retaking the House. The Senate map is a lot tougher. I mean, Democrats are defending seats in Montana, in West Virginia, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in Arizona. So it is a tough map out there. The Democrats' best offensive chances are flipping seats in Texas and Florida. And if you think that's an uphill climb, you're right. These are not easy seats for Democrats to flip. I don't remember the last time. Well, I guess Bill Nelson was the last time a Democrat was a senator in the state of Florida. I don't remember the last time we had a senator from the Democratic Party in Texas. But either way, it's going to be an uphill climb for the Democrats. But hopefully, because of the Republicans' extreme position on issues like abortion, on issues like democracy and certifying election results, that will allow some of these more popular senators who are running from the Democratic Party in their own states to win their elections, despite the fact that their states are trending or are red, like Montana, like West Virginia, like Ohio. If Democrats, so I'm getting questions now in the chat. If Democrats are higher, if they have more votes, will the vote still go on? Yes, the vote goes on until somebody can get 217 votes. So even though the Democrats might have 212 or 213 for Hakeem Jeffries, and for example, if Mike Johnson only is able to get 200 votes, this whole process will continue because you need to hit that threshold of 217. By the way, if you want to ask any questions, if you want me to talk about anything that's going on, just throw your question in the chat. To be able to participate in the chat, you do have to subscribe. It's completely free, doesn't cost you anything. And by the way, even if you're not participating in the chat, please subscribe to this channel. It's the best way to support me, to support my work, to support these live streams, and you can also stay on top of my other coverage on a daily basis. Why won't reporters ask Republicans when the last time they voted for a Democrat for Speaker was, when they try to blame Democrats for Republicans' own mess? That is a great question, and they won't do it because Republicans are graded on a curve. That's what the difference is. Republicans can be enmeshed in their chaos of their own making. Republican reporters will never question them on it. It'll always be this talking point that it's up to the Democrats to swoop in and save Republicans from themselves. So that we're clear, it is now the Democrats' responsibility to figure out how to help Republicans govern using their own majority. That is not the Democrats' responsibility. Republicans campaigned for a majority. They ostensibly wanted a majority. They got a majority. Now it is up to them to figure out how to do the bare minimum and govern with it. And again, we're not talking about like rewriting the tax code here. We are just talking about getting them to elect a speaker. Day one stuff. So that they can then move forward and determine if they want to vote for any legislation or move any of their political priorities forward. We're talking about, like, forget acing the test. This is writing your name on the thing. That's what this is. That's what this is the equivalent to. This is getting your name on the SATs and you get like 500 points right off the bat. That's what they can't do. They're somehow managing a 0 on the SATs when writing your name on them will get you 500 points. That's what we're witnessing right now. As you can see from the Quorum call, it's officially over, but we have about 20 or so lawmakers who haven't yet come into the chamber. So as soon as those last stragglers come in, we can get this thing started. If you're watching right now and wondering when we're going to get going, as soon as these last remaining members of Congress come in, and that number is about to be at 19 in just a few seconds, as soon as these last remaining 20 or so members of Congress come in, the next thing that's going to happen is a Republican will stand up, nominate Mike Johnson for Speaker from their party. A Democrat will stand up, nominate Hakeem Jeffries for Speaker for the Democrats, and then they'll start voting. And we'll know pretty damn soon whether Mike Johnson has a good chance at becoming Speaker, because right off the bat, there are a number of Republicans who refuse to vote for Jim Jordan, starting with Don Bacon right there in the B's, and then Vern Buchanan, and then Ken Buck. So there are a lot of Republicans in the early letters of the alphabet, and we'll see if they were, those people who were willing to not vote for Jim Jordan, if they are willing to vote for someone like Mike Johnson, who, by the way, is just as extreme as Jim Jordan. He just doesn't have the high name ID, the baggage that he does. So again, as you can see, we're at 19 members of Congress who haven't yet voted, members from both parties, but these people are slowly filtering their way in. So if you're watching right now, make sure to stay here, because as soon as we have these last holdouts make their way onto the floor and vote just in this quorum call, then we can get started in earnest on the Speaker election.
that is, that to take that job, it took 30 minutes for them to decide if they wanted it or not. So we're really in unprecedented times, and it doesn't appear as if that unprecedentedness will stop.
James, let's talk about what we're actually watching on the floor here. The tagging of Mike Johnson and a lot of photos will be happening soon, so at least his Twitter or Instagram profile will be going up significantly
and
here.
Byron Donalds, who was one of the candidates for Speaker in both votes yesterday, the morning and the afternoon. So he ran against Johnson twice. He has taken pictures of 3 of his colleagues with him. He's standing there just sort of trying to be close to the action. And you really are seeing people pose for photos from every wing of the conference. I mean, Rhonda pointed out Veronica Escobar, who represents El Paso, Beto O'Rourke's old district, went up to congratulate him. But you really have the whole range of people who are kind of getting on board. And there is a strong incentive. The way these things work, once that you have that sense of momentum, it really matters because
so we are seeing reporting right now that it does look like Mike Johnson will have the support necessary to become the next speaker, as far as like some people kind of counting behind the scenes. So again, it remains to be seen. We're just a few votes away here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get us into the C-SPAN feed. So we'll go full on me for just a moment while I pull up this C-SPAN feed. But again, for those who are just tuning in, it does look like, according to some of the reporting that we're seeing right now, that Mike Johnson will have the votes necessary to become the next speaker. But again, that remains to be seen. We have just 9 members who haven't voted present yet in this quorum call, so in just a few moments we will get this vote started in earnest here. All right, so we have our C-SPAN feed here, and in just a few moments again, we'll get these last members on the floor. Somebody will stand up, nominate Mike Johnson to become the next Republican speaker. We'll have a Democrat stand up, nominate Hakeem Jeffries to become the next speaker. And from there, the vote will happen. So if you're watching right now, stay here, and we're just minutes away from this thing starting. So one question, if so many people are going to vote Democratic for the House, shouldn't the Senate have high chances to remain Democratic in 2024 as well? So there's a difference between the districts that Democrats are looking to flip and the full states that Democrats are looking to protect in terms of protecting their majority. So if the Democrats are looking to flip anywhere from 20 to 30 seats in the House that could be competitive, these seats are not going to be in the same states as the Senate seats that are currently being defended by Democrats. So, for example, just because we can flip a district in Louisiana or Alabama because they become black opportunity districts, or Florida's 5th congressional district, or 4 to 6 seats in New York, that is not the same as being able to retain a Senate seat in a deep red state like Montana or West Virginia or Ohio. So we do have a good chance to flip a lot of these seats because a lot of these seats are the result of new maps in, again, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Utah, we're looking for another seat. Florida's 5th congressional district, we're looking at another seat. We're looking at 4 to 6 seats in New York. But just because we can flip these seats in these swing states or because of new maps doesn't mean, again, that we'll be able to properly defend deep red states like a Senate seat in Montana, a Senate seat in West Virginia, a Senate seat in Ohio, a Senate seat in Arizona, a Senate seat in Pennsylvania. So these are tough states. These are swing states that are coming up, or if not swing states, just true red states. And so, just because we can perform well in the House doesn't necessarily forebode a good performance in the Senate. But again, given the way, even some of these deep red states like Kansas voted on the issue of abortion, like Ohio voted on the issue of amending their constitution, which again was all in service of abortion rights, we could possibly have better chances as the result of that. But all of that remains to be seen. And by the way, if you're watching right now, I think if you hit the like button, it helps with search results and the algorithm or something like that. So if you're watching right now, hit the like button. If you're watching also, please make sure to subscribe to this channel. It costs you nothing. It's the best way to support what I do. It's the best way to support my work and these live streams for as long as they go. And they've gone a long time. We are several days into this process right now. For those just joining, just to give a very brief overview of what we can expect if Mike Johnson does become the next speaker. Here is who Mike Johnson is. Mike Johnson is another far-right MAGA Republican who voted to steal the 2020 election. He voted to disenfranchise millions of voters in doing so. He wants to ban abortion nationwide. He's co-sponsored 3 bills to be able to do that. He opposes the legalization of same-sex marriage. He opposes marijuana legalization. He represented Donald Trump during the impeachment. The New York Times called him the most important architect of the Electoral College objections. I believe he's the vice chair of the House Freedom Caucus. He has ties to anti-LGBT organizations and wrote anti-LGBT bills in the mold of Ron DeSantis. So any way you cut it, this guy Mike Johnson is about as extreme as it gets. So it remains to be seen what these self-proclaimed moderates do when it comes time to vote today. But we did have 25 Republicans come out against Jim Jordan in the last go round on the last ballot here. So a number of those were, people who fashioned themselves moderate in the Republican Party. So if they're going to be willing to vote against Jim Jordan and yet for Mike Johnson, it goes to show that it was never his position that was a no-go for them. It was just the fact that they didn't want to be associated by Jim Jordan because he has low approval ratings in a lot of these districts where these Republicans are currently sitting in moderate seats. So we'll know that in just a few moments. Only 6 members of the House here who haven't yet come in. We may not see all of the Democrats today. I haven't seen anything in terms of how many Democrats are out right now. But right now there's still just one Republican who hasn't yet found their way into the chamber, and there are 5 Democrats. And somebody say, volume on when there's a caller from Alabama so we can judge. Again, we're just a few moments away from this thing starting. There are always just a handful of stragglers who haven't made their way onto the House floor. It is possible that there won't be full attendance from the Democrats. Democrats are always going to be united behind Hakeem Jeffries. Hakeem Jeffries every time has had 213 or 212 votes. Really, what this matters for is to determine what the threshold is for a speaker, and whether Mike Johnson, again, not entirely sure this is a real person, whether he can meet that threshold. So if you're watching right now, we are just moments away. Just moments away. This thing should have started a few minutes ago already. So we are just moments away. It is ironic that the reason that Tom Emmer, who was the speaker designate for all of 4 hours yesterday, isn't ultimately going to be the choice for speaker is because the hill that Republicans decided to die on was that he voted to support same-sex marriage equality. That was the issue that was like a litmus test issue for Republicans in the year 2023. So it's 2023, the issue that's still being litigated within the Republican Party, that's still a litmus test issue for Republicans, is do they support marriage equality? If a gay couple wants to get married and you support that and you allow people to live their own lives, that's apparently a bridge too far for the Republican conference today. In 2023, a backwards party. that deserves permanent minority status. But what is okay for them is apparently having the key architect of the January 6th strategy to overturn the 2020 election. That's apparently perfectly acceptable for a party that brands itself the party of the Constitution. Give me a break, an actual break. But hey, I guess the most important thing here is just that you get the green light from Donald Trump, that the cult leader gives you the thumbs up, and then once you have that, it's all good, because these people are so afraid of him supporting a primary challenger for any of them, because they know the grip that Donald Trump has on the base, on the primary voters, that these people who are current members of Congress are willing to walk off the cliff for him just to avoid any type of a primary challenge that would be brought about by Donald Trump, because they know the stranglehold he has on primary voters. So we are moments away here. Looks like only 4 members aren't present. This thing should get started any second now, literally any second. I know I've been saying that for a long time, but any second now. They're not going to just wait until all these members are present. Some of them aren't coming, and so they'll just get this thing going. From there, the very next thing that is going to happen here is that a Republican is going to stand up, most likely Elise Stefanik, introduce Mike Johnson as a nominee for Republican Speaker. A Democrat is then going to stand up and introduce Hakeem Jeffries as the nominee for Democratic Speaker, and we'll start voting. So just a few members haven't made their way to the floor. We may get started any second now regardless. They are not going to wait forever. Do not worry. It's not like they're going to wait forever. Does the rise in blue voters among young people indicate to you at all that in the future we'll see more of these deep red or contested seats flip in Democrats' favor? Yes, I mean, that's the danger of basically putting all your cards on older and older voters while completely abandoning young voters who are obviously more progressive, more liberal on issues than Republicans are willing to be. I mean, that's the thing. Republicans aren't looking for a majority. They're not looking for majority support on any of the issues. That's why they're gerrymandering maps. That's why they're refusing to certify elections that don't benefit them, because this is not a party that's looking to actually engage in the democratic process. They don't want to win over voters. They just want to, they're in permanent minority status by virtue of the positions they espouse, but they know they can't win over any voters with their stances on the positions, and so they're just going to rig the process. They just want to gerrymander maps because they're not willing to change their position on issues, even if it means that they won't have any support, because young people, as more and more young people are eligible to vote, they're not going to vote for Republicans. They don't care about that. Their priority here is just making sure that with the minority of voters that they can get, that they can still win. That's why they're gerrymandering maps. That's why they're making it more difficult to vote. That's why they're eliminating drop boxes and early voting. That's why they're introducing these lawsuits to stop votes from being counted. That's why any type of early voting is prevented. That's why they're making it harder for new voters to get registered to vote. That's why they're shortening the period of registrations. That's why they're eliminating voters from the rolls. Anything they can do to make sure that even if they're not getting the votes of young people or minorities or women or whatever it is, college-educated voters, that they can just eliminate those votes that they don't like. It's not them looking to reach out to these people so that they can stay a viable party in the future. It's them looking to undermine the entire process so that no matter how many people vote against them, it won't matter. That all it needs for them to win is just some minority faction of voters that they can then just distort to make themselves the winners of these elections. So, do we know that young people are not voting for Republicans? Of course we do, but that's why they're simultaneously undermining the process so that it won't matter how many people vote against them, they'll still win. These people are looking to just be in minority rule. That's what they're focused on right now. Okay, I expect any second now that they will get this thing going. So let me see if we can get some audio here.
It's their way and their way only.
All right. Well, that audio is still a phone call into C-SPAN, but again, we are just any second away, and I know I've been saying that for a while, but any second away from voting beginning. So we're at the end of this quorum call. There's just a handful of Democrats, 3 Democrats who aren't there, 1 Republican who's not there. The threshold will either be 216 or 217 to elect a speaker. This thing is going to get going any second now, and voting will begin. So if you're watching right now, stick around. If you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please subscribe, because we're getting into this vote any moment now, just within minutes here, and we'll know who's going to be the next Republican speaker, whether it will be this guy Mike Johnson. All right, somebody said, I would rather cheat than compete. That is the perfect encapsulation of what we're dealing with the GOP right now.
McCarthy. So that's just some of the state of play as we wait for these final 4 people to finish the call of the House. Rudy in Texas, Democrats line. You are next. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good morning. How you doing?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to know why they're always complaining about Biden being old. I think he's smarter than all these Republicans in there right now. They're picking somebody right now. Can you hear me?
Caller, you're going to have to stop listening to your television and just finish your thought, please.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, and I'm just wondering why they...
All right, so it looks like we're close to getting started. We just have 4 members who aren't there. They'll probably just start this session without those 4, and we'll get going on the vote here. If anybody does have questions, you can throw them in the chat. To be able to participate in the chat, you just have to subscribe. And again, even if you're not going to participate in the chat, you can subscribe anyway. So it looks like we're getting going here.
Looks like the gavel is cut down. We'll go back to the House of Representatives.
Are all members recorded? On this roll call, 429 members have recorded their presence. The question now recurs on the election of Speaker. The tellers will please come forward to take their seats once again.
So I believe the threshold now is 215, because 4 members are absent. 215 should be the number.
Oh, I didn't even notice.
Again, for anybody just joining, we're getting started with the nominations right now. Elise Stefanik will most likely stand up and nominate Mike Johnson. Then we'll have a Democrat stand up, nominate Hakeem Jeffries, and then voting will begin.
All right.
And again, before we get started here, one last request. If you're not yet subscribed to this channel and you want to support this live stream or support my channel, please subscribe. It doesn't cost anything to be able to do so, but it's definitely the best way to support my work, and I would definitely appreciate it. I'll continue to host these live streams for as long as it takes to choose a speaker. So again, if you haven't yet subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. It is completely free. Thanks everybody.
The nominations are now in order. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Stefanik.
Mr. Speaker Pro Temp, Madam Clerk, colleagues, on behalf of the House Republican Conference, I rise today to nominate the gentleman from Louisiana, Mike Johnson, as Speaker of the People's House. esteemed body today at a time of great crisis across America, a time of unprecedented challenges in this hallowed chamber, and a time when our most precious ally, Israel's very existence, is under attack from forces of evil. Yesterday, our dear colleague, our former conference chair, our chair of Energy and Commerce, Cathy McMorris Rodgers, nominated Mike Johnson in our conference. And she put it best, and I want to quote her today. She said, quote, "Trust has been broken and we have come to a standstill. How do we restore trust between members, leadership, and ultimately between Congress and we, the people?" Cathy went on to say, "There's a sense that it cannot be business as usual." She went on to note, above the Speaker's chair in the House chamber is our nation's motto, "In God we trust." Ms. McMorris Rodgers went on to say, "The times in which we are living demand boldness, unity, and transformational leadership that begins with trust in God and each other. Trust is when the magic happens." In the story of King David, we are reminded that man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart, end quote. Today is the day that House Republicans will humbly look in our hearts and elect Mike Johnson as Speaker of the People's House. A man of deep faith, Mike epitomizes what it means to be a servant leader. A deeply respected constitutional lawyer, Mike has dedicated his life to preserving America's great principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mike is a titan on the Judiciary Committee and a dedicated member of the House Armed Services Committee. And as vice chair of our conference, he has united all of our members to speak clearly and boldly on behalf of the American people. A friend to all and an enemy to none, Mike is strong, tough, and fair, and above all, Mike is kind. And at this very moment, this Republican conference knows that we live in perilous times and the American people are hurting. Families are struggling under the pain of inflation caused by reckless far-left spending, unable to afford groceries, heat, or gas. We have an inhumane open border with millions illegally smuggled and trafficked, and tens of thousands of children lost in the chasm of the incompetence and negligence of the Biden administration. Israel is under attack by Iranian-backed Hamas terrorists committing atrocities, with Israelis suffering the bloodiest days in modern memory. Crime is skyrocketing on our streets, while there are vicious calls from the left to defund our great men and women in blue. American energy production has been crushed by Joe Biden's radical, failed, far-left Democrat policies, causing seniors, farmers, and families to pay more at the pump. And Americans fundamentally understand that the federal government has been illegally weaponized against we, the people, shredding the Constitution, targeting conservatives, parents, yes, I'll say it again. The federal government has been illegally weaponized against we, the people, shredding the Constitution, targeting conservatives, parents, and even Joe Biden's top political opponent. The people are looking to this great chamber to save America, and save America we will. we embark on the path ahead, I am reminded of Galatians 6:9. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. House Republicans and Speaker Mike Johnson will never give up. Today is the day we get this done. May God bless our next Speaker, Mike Johnson. May God bless the United States of America. And I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tempore. I notice a little bit more of a smile on your face today than we have in the past. Mr. Speaker, I rise today at the direction of the Democratic Caucus to place into nomination for the position of Speaker of the House of Representatives the Honorable Hakeem Jeffries from New York. Mr. Speaker, you may agree with this, but we are back here 22 days into this Republican-manufactured chaos, and House Republicans have brought us to the exact same position that we were back then. All of the infighting, all of the disarray, just to end up where we were 3 weeks ago. These past few weeks, we have been left wondering if Republicans were truly intent on solving our issues, reopening the House of Representatives, and rallying around someone to lead this chamber. Or has this been about something else? Has this been about a focus of House Republicans to find the person who can pass their extreme litmus test to oppose marriage equality, enact a nationwide abortion ban without exceptions, gut Social Security and Medicare, and support overturning a free and fair election? It's a fair question. It's a fair question. No one. Nowhere in that candidate questionnaire is it about growing the middle class, helping our communities, keeping the cost of health care lower, and making life for everyday Americans better. The gentlewoman from New York said it right. This has been about one thing. This has been about who can appease Donald Trump.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's what this all comes down to. This is all about Donald Trump. That's why Tom Emmer is not the Republican nominee anymore, because Trump gave him the thumbs down.
Behind someone who has been called the most important architect of the Electoral College objections. He's spearheaded, that's fair, we know how you feel. Yeah, you've made that clear. He's spearheaded the legal effort, joined by more than 100 of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, in support of a dangerous and baseless lawsuit to overturn the results of the 2020 election. On the eve of January 6th, some of my Republican colleagues even called this a failed strategy. Yet those same individuals plan to stand right next to him today. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, House Democrats believe that when members of this body voted to reject the results of the 2020 election, they forfeited their ability to lead this chamber. On this side of the aisle, we know what leadership looks like. Hakeem Jeffries has never turned his back on the will of the American people. The son of two social workers, he's always stood by the side of working families. The most pressing needs of everyday Americans are his North Star. He believes that everyone in America should have the opportunity to get ahead and achieve their version of the American dream. He believes that access to affordable health care is a right, not a privilege. He believes that reproductive freedom must be guaranteed, not stripped away. He believes that working families, not the wealthy and the well-connected, should be rewarded. He believes in growing the middle class so that everyone can succeed. He believes that our schools and our communities should be safe and free from gun violence. He believes that investing in public schools, not depriving students of fact-based education by banning books. He believes in taking care of our seniors and our veterans, not slashing their benefits. He believes in living up to the promise that America is a beacon of hope and a land of opportunity. He believes in defending democracy against all enemies and adversaries, foreign and domestic. He believes in standing by our allies, Israel and Ukraine. And he believes in keeping our government running and open. Let me be clear. This is not just a belief system. Leader Jeffries has the track record to back it up. He is certainly a far contrast from who Republicans have nominated, with or without their votes, to nominate today. But if House Republicans choose, they can still join us on a bipartisan path forward. Let's come together to fund our government, support our allies abroad, and deliver for working families. End the chaos, end the dysfunction, end the extremism. Let's open up the people's house. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
All right, so what we can expect now is the voting to begin.
The reading clerk will now call the roll.
Adams.
All right.
Jeffries.
Here's the first name to look
Adderholt.
out for. Bacon.
Johnson.
If Don Bacon
Aguilar.
Votes for
All four.
Johnson, then it's likely that he'll win, and it also shows that these moderates are yet again
Johnson.
caving. So Don Bacon.
Allen. Johnson. All red. Jeffries. Amadei. Johnson. Armstrong. Johnson. Arrington. Johnson. Auchincloss. Jeffries. Babin. Johnson. Bacon.
There's
Johnson.
one.
Baird.
Next one is Buchanan.
Johnson. Balderson. Johnson. Ballant. Jeffries. Banks. Johnson. Barr. Johnson. Berrigan. Jeffries. Bean of Florida. Johnson. Beatty. Jeffries. Bentz. Johnson. Barra. Jeffries. Bergman. Johnson. Byer. Byer. Bice. Johnson. Biggs. Johnson. Bilirakis. Johnson. Bishop of Georgia. Jeffries. Bishop of North Carolina. Johnson. Blumenauer. Jeffries. Blunt Rochester. Jeffries. Boebert.
Again, the next name to look out for
Johnson.
is Buchanan.
Bonamici. Jeffries. Bost. Johnson. Bowman. Jeffries. Boyle of Pennsylvania. Boyle of Pennsylvania. Burkeen. Johnson. Brown. Jeffries. Brownlee. Jeffries. Buchanan.
Here's one.
Johnson.
All right, that's another defection.
Buck.
Clawed back. Here's another one. Buck.
Johnson.
Johnson. So that's 3
Bouchon.
so far.
Johnson. Bazinski.
The next name to look out for
Jeffries.
is Chavez de Remer. Chavez
Burchett.
de Remer.
Johnson. Burgess. Johnson. Burleson. Johnson. Bush. Jeffries. Calvert. Johnson. Kamek. Johnson. Caraveo. Jeffries. Carbajal. Jeffries. Cardenas. Jeffries. Carey. Johnson. Carl. Johnson. Carson. Jeffries. Carter of Georgia. Johnson. Carter of Louisiana. Jeffries. Carter of Texas. Johnson. Cartwright. Jeffries.
Next name to look out for
Kassar.
Chavez de Remer.
Jeffries. Case. Jeffries. Caston. Jeffries. Castor of Florida. Jeffries. Castro of Texas. Jeffries. Chavez de Remer. Johnson.
There's another one clawed back.
Sherfilis McCormick. Jeffries.
So it looks like
Chu.
Mike Johnson is consolidating all of the support from these holdouts. The next name to look out for is D'Esposito.
Johnson. Clark of Massachusetts. Jeffries. Clark of New York. Jeffries. Cleaver. Jeffries. Klein. Johnson. Cloud. Johnson. Clyburn. Jeffries. Clyde. Johnson. Cohen.
Jeffries.
Jeffries. Cole. Johnson. Collins. Johnson. Comer. Johnson. Connolly. Jeffries. Correa. Correa. Costa. Jeffries. Courtney. Jeffries. Craig.
She said, "Happy wedding anniversary to my wife." That's what she said. That was Angie Craig, Democrat Angie
Jeffries. Crane. Johnson. Crawford. Johnson. Crenshaw.
Again, for those just joining, the name to look out for
Johnson.
next is D'Esposito,
Crockett.
a self-proclaimed moderate.
Jeffries. Crow. Jeffries. Cuellar. Jeffries. Curtis. Johnson. Davis of Kansas. Jeffries. Davidson. Johnson. Davis of Illinois. Jeffries. Davis of North Carolina. Jeffries. Dean of Pennsylvania. Jeffries.
D'Esposito.
DeGette. Jeffries. Dela Cruz. Johnson. DeLauro. Jeffries. Del Bene. Jeffries. DeLuzio.
All right, here we
Jeffries. DeSaulnier. Jeffries. Desjardins. Johnson. D'Esposito. Johnson.
go. That's another one clawed back.
Diaz-Balart.
Here's another one.
Johnson.
Both of them.
Dingle.
Both of them were.
Jeffries.
Both D'Esposito and Diaz-Balart voted
Doggett.
for Lee Zeldin and Steve Scalise instead of Jim Jordan.
Jeffries.
Both of them just voted for
Donalds.
Johnson.
Johnson. Duarte. Johnson.
Next name to look out for
Duncan.
is Elzy. Elzy.
Johnson. Dunn of Florida. Johnson. Edwards. Johnson. Elzy.
There's another one.
Johnson. Emmer.
So that was Tom Emmer, who just voted for Johnson. He was the speaker designate for all of 4 hours yesterday before getting replaced by Johnson. So far, all 7 holdouts against Jim Jordan have voted for Johnson.
Jeffries. Eshoo.
Next name to look out for
Jeffries.
is Ferguson.
Espaillat. Jeffries. Estes. Johnson. Evans. Jeffries. Ezell. Johnson. Fallon. Johnson. Finstra. Johnson. Ferguson. Johnson. Finstad. Johnson. Fishbach. Johnson. Fitzgerald. Johnson. Fitzpatrick. Johnson. Fleischman. Johnson. Fletcher. Jeffries. Flood. Johnson. Foster. Jeffries.
Next name to look out for is
Fushi.
Garbarino.
Jeffries.
But it does look like all of these self-proclaimed moderates have fallen in line and caved to the extremist faction to vote for
Lois
Johnson.
Frankel. Jeffries. Scott Franklin. Johnson. Frost. Jeffries. Fry. Johnson. Fulcher. Johnson. Gates. Johnson. Gallagher. Johnson. Gallego. Gallego. Garamendi. Jeffries. Garbarino. Johnson.
There's another one. He voted for Lee Zeldin.
Mike Garcia.
Next name is Jimenez.
Johnson. Robert Garcia. Jeffries. Garcia of Illinois. Jeffries. Garcia of Texas. Jeffries. Jimenez. Johnson.
There's
Golden
another
of
one.
Maine.
Next name is Gonzalez.
Jeffries.
Although by now, all
Goldman
11 holdouts,
of New York.
all 11 defections have all voted for Johnson. Johnson's going to get full support, it looks like.
Gomez.
But the next name is Gonzalez.
Jeffries. Tony Gonzalez. Johnson. Vicente Gonzalez. Vicente Gonzalez. Good of Virginia. Johnson. Gooden of Texas. Johnson. Gosar. Johnson. Gottheimer. Jeffries. Granger. Johnson. Graves of Louisiana. Johnson. Graves of Missouri. Johnson. Green of Tennessee. Johnson. Green of Texas. Jeffries. Green of Georgia. Johnson. Griffith. Johnson. Grijalva. Jeffries. Grothman. Johnson. Guest. Johnson. Guthrie. Johnson. Hageman. Johnson. Harder of California. Jeffries. Harris. Johnson. Harsbarger. Johnson. Hayes. Jeffries. Hearn. Johnson.
They're applauding for Hearn because he was a candidate for speaker
Higgins
as
of
well.
Louisiana.
And obviously everybody's falling in line. Not surprisingly,
Higgins of New
the
York.
extremists, but
Jeffries.
more importantly, the moderates who claim that they didn't want to vote for Jim Jordan because he was too extreme. Mike Johnson is just as extreme as Jim Jordan. Refused to certify the election. Against
Johnson.
same-sex marriage.
Himes.
Against abortion. Has authored
Jeffries.
3 bills to
Pinson.
to impose
Johnson.
nationwide abortion restrictions.
Horsford. Jeffries. Houchin. Johnson. Houlihan. Jeffries. Hoyer. Jeffries. Hoyle of Oregon. Jeffries. Hudson. Johnson. Huffman. Jeffries. Huizinga. Johnson. Hunt.
Mark Johnson.
Johnson. Issa. Johnson. Ivy. Jeffries. Jackson of Illinois. Jeffries. Jackson of North Carolina. Jeffries. Jackson of Texas. Johnson. Jackson Lee.
The distinguished gentleman, Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Jacobs. Jeffries. James. Johnson. Jayapal. Jeffries. 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 Johnson of Georgia.
Standing for reproductive freedom for women, I cast my vote for Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Johnson of Louisiana. Johnson. Johnson of Ohio. Johnson. Johnson of South Dakota. Johnson. Jordan. Johnson. Joyce of Ohio. Joyce of Ohio. Johnson. Joyce of Pennsylvania. Johnson. Camlogger Dove. Jeffries. Captor. Jeffries. Kane of New Jersey. Johnson. Keating. Jeffries. Kelly of Illinois. Jeffries. Kelly of Mississippi. Johnson. Kelly of Pennsylvania. Johnson. Khanna. Jeffries. Kiggins of Virginia. Johnson. Kildee. Jeffries. Kiley. Johnson. Kilmer. Jeffries. Kim of California. Johnson. Kim of New Jersey. Jeffries. Krishnamurthy. Jeffries. Custer. Jeffries. Kustoff. Johnson. LaHood. Johnson. LaLota. Johnson. LaMalfa. Johnson. Lamborn. Johnson. Landsman. Landsman. Jeffries. Langworthy. Johnson. Larson of Washington. Jeffries. Larson of Connecticut. Jeffries. Latta. Johnson. LaTurner. Johnson. Lawler. Johnson. Lee of California. Jeffries. Lee of Florida. Johnson. Lee of Nevada. Jeffries. Lee of Pennsylvania. Jeffries. Ledger Fernandez. Jeffries. Lesko. Johnson. Letlow. Johnson. Levin. Jeffries. Liu. Jeffries. Lofgren. Jeffries. Loudermilk.
Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Lucas. Johnson. Luke Kameyer. Johnson. Luna. Johnson. Electoral. Johnson. Lynch. Jeffries. Mace. Johnson. Magaziner. Jeffries. Maliotakis. Johnson. Mann. Johnson. Manning. Jeffries. Massey. Johnson. Mast. Johnson. Matsui. Jeffries. McBath. Jeffries. McCarthy. Johnson. McCall. Johnson. McLean. Johnson. McClellan. Jeffries. McClintock. Johnson. McCullum. Jeffries. McCormick. Johnson. McGarvey. Jeffries. McGovern. Jeffries. McHenry. Johnson. Meeks. Jeffries. Menendez. Jeffries. Ming. Jeffries. Muser. Johnson. Mfume. Jeffries. Miller of Illinois. Johnson. Miller of Ohio. Johnson. Miller of West Virginia. Johnson. Miller Meeks. Johnson. Mills. Johnson. Molinaro. Johnson. Molinar.
Another Republican
Johnson.
in a Biden 1 district, Molinaro.
Johnson. Moore of Alabama. Johnson. Moore of Utah. Johnson. Moore of Wisconsin. Jeffries. Moran. Johnson. Morelli. Jeffries. Moskowitz. Jeffries. Moulton. Jeffries. Mervan. Jeffries. Mullen. Jeffries. Murphy. Johnson. Nadler. Jeffries. Napolitano. Jeffries. Neal. Jeffries. Neguse. Jeffries. Nels. Johnson. Newhouse. Johnson. Nickel. Jeffries. Norcross. Jeffries. Norman. Johnson. Nunn of Iowa. Johnson. Obernolte. Johnson. Ocasio-Cortez. Jeffries. Ogles. Johnson. Omar. Jeffries. Owens. Johnson. Pallone. Jeffries. Palmer. Johnson. Panetta. Jeffries. Pappas. Jeffries. Pasquale. Jeffries. Payne.
Gentleman from New York, Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Pelosi. Jeffries. Peltola. Jeffries. Pence. Johnson. Perez. Jeffries. Perry. Johnson. Peters. Jeffries. Pedersen. Jeffries. Pfluger. Johnson. Phillips. Jeffries. Pingree. Jeffries. Pocan. Jeffries. Porter. Jeffries. Posey. Johnson. Presley. Jeffries. Quigley. Jeffries. Ramirez. Jeffries. Raskin. Jeffries. Reschenthaler. Johnson. Rogers of Washington. Johnson. Rogers of Alabama. Johnson. Rogers of Kentucky. Johnson. Rose. Johnson. Rosendale. Johnson. Ross. Jeffries. Rouser. Johnson. Roy. Johnson. Ruiz. Jeffries. Rupersberger. Jeffries. Rutherford.
The very honorable Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Ryan. Jeffries. Salazar. Johnson. Salinas. Jeffries. Sanchez. Jeffries. Santos. Johnson. Sarbanes. Jeffries. Scalise.
Great state of Louisiana, Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Scanlon. Jeffries. Schakowsky. Jeffries. Schiff. Jeffries. Snyder. Jeffries. Skolton. Jeffries. Schreier. Jeffries. Swikert. Johnson. Austin Scott. Johnson. David Scott. Jeffries. Scott of Virginia. Jeffries. Self. Johnson. Sessions. Johnson. Sewell. Jeffries. Sherman. Jeffries. Sherrill. Jeffries. Simpson. Johnson. Slotkin. Jeffries. Smith of Missouri. Johnson. Smith of Nebraska. Johnson. Smith of New Jersey. Johnson. Smith of Washington. Jeffries. Smucker. Johnson. Sorensen. Jeffries. Soto. Jeffries. Spanberger. Jeffries. Sparts. Johnson. Stensbury. Jeffries. Stanton. Jeffries. Stauber. Johnson. Steele. Johnson. Stefanik. Johnson. Style. Johnson. Stubbe. Johnson. Stevens. Jeffries. Strickland.
For the protection of voting rights, Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries. Strong. Johnson. Swalwell. Jeffries. Sykes. Jeffries. Takano. Jeffries. Tenney. Johnson. Tanadar. Jeffries. Thompson of California. Jeffries. Thompson of Mississippi. Jeffries. Thompson of Pennsylvania. Johnson.
So that's that 200
Tiffany.
threshold.
Johnson. Timmons. Johnson. Titus. Jeffries. Tlaib. Jeffries. Takuda. Jeffries. Tonko. Jeffries. Torres of California. Jeffries. Torres of New York. Jeffries. Trahan. Jeffries. Trone. Jeffries. Turner. Johnson. Underwood. Jeffries. Valadeo. Johnson. Van Drew. Johnson. Van Dyne. Johnson. Van Orden. Van Orden. Vargas. Jeffries. Vasquez. Jeffries. Vesey. Jeffries. Velasquez. Jeffries. Wagner. Johnson. Wahlberg. Johnson. Waltz. Johnson. Wasserman Schultz. Jeffries. Waters. Jeffries. Watson Coleman.
As the only candidate who represents the integrity of this House,
Watson Coleman.
do I need to say Hakeem Jeffries again because I read?
Jeffries.
The House will come to order. The clerk, the staff, and the tellers deserve to have the attention of the House. The clerk will continue.
Weber of Texas. Johnson. Webster of Florida. Johnson. Winstrup. Johnson. Westerman. Johnson. Wexton. Jeffries. Wild. Jeffries.
They'll probably applaud in a second because
Williams of Georgia.
Threshold is 215.
Jeffries.
Next vote for
Williams
Johnson
of New
seals
York.
it for him.
Johnson.
So
Williams
they're applauding
of
now
Texas.
because it's official. Mike Johnson does have the
Johnson.
votes. He will be the next Speaker of
Wilson
the House.
of Florida. Wilson of Florida. Jeffries. Wilson of South Carolina. Johnson. Whitman. Johnson. Womack.
With the 217th pick in the race for Speaker, 3rd District of Arkansas, selects Mike Johnson.
Johnson. Yacom. Johnson. Zinke.
The next Speaker of the People's House.
Johnson.
Okay, so it is official right now. What they're going to do at this point is go back and call the names of people.
The clerk will now call the names of the members who did not answer the first call of the roll.
I believe these will be a few
Fire.
for Hakeem Jeffries.
Jeffries.
We can expect to see maybe 3 more for Jeffries, I believe. 2 to 3 more.
Who do you have? Boyle of Pennsylvania. Boyle of Pennsylvania. Correa. Correa. Gallego. Jeffries. Vicente Gonzalez. Vicente Gonzalez. Van Orden. Van Orden.
If there are any members who did not answer the call of the roll, they may come to the well and vote at this time.
So at this point, I believe that they will be counting the votes for an official tally. This should take a few minutes, but what's clear right now is that Mike Johnson has become elected Speaker. Just to give you an idea for those watching of who Mike Johnson is, he is as extreme a Republican as you could possibly find. He was the architect of Republicans' efforts to overturn the 2020 election in the House, so he worked closely with Trump on that. He also is in favor of gutting earned benefits like Social Security and Medicare. He's authored 3 bills to ban abortion nationwide. So for any of these moderate Republicans who come out and say, oh, we couldn't possibly stomach Jim Jordan, he's too extreme, and then those same people to turn around and vote for someone like Mike Johnson goes to show that it was never about the extreme positions, and it was always about the fact that Jim Jordan has high name ID and they didn't want to be saddled by the association with him. That's it. They were just looking out for themselves. They knew it was going to be much harder to go back to their district, their moderate district, and say, hey, vote for me so that we can empower Jim Jordan as Speaker. But when it comes to someone like Mike Johnson, who is just as extreme, if not more, than Jim Jordan, because he's against earned benefits, he's against entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, he's against any type of women's reproductive rights, he's against same-sex marriage.
In their tallies, that the total number of votes cast is 429, of which the Honorable Mike Johnson of the state of Louisiana has received 220 votes. And the Honorable Hakeem Jeffries of the state of New York has received 209 votes. Therefore, the Honorable Mike Johnson of the state of Louisiana, having received a majority of the votes cast, is duly elected Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 118th Congress. The chair appoints the following committee to escort the Speaker-elect to the chair. The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise. The gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Emmer. The gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Stefanik. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson. The gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer. The gentlewoman from Michigan, Mrs. McLean. The gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Donalds. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Hearn. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bergman. The gentlewoman from Washington, Mrs. Rogers. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Arrington. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Molinaro. The gentlewoman from Florida, Mrs. Carmack. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries. The gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark. The gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar. The gentleman from California, Mr. Liu. The gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Delbene. The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Escobar. The gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Underwood. The gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Kildee. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Jacobs. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Crockett. And the members of the Louisiana delegation, Mr. Graves, Mr. Higgins, Ms. Letlow, Mr. Carter. The committee will retire from the chamber to escort the Speaker-elect to the chair.
Okay, so as I was saying before, what they're going to do is they're going to do this procession, and it'll take a few minutes. But just to go back to who Mike Johnson is, for those watching right now, a leading 2020 election denier. He wants to cut Social Security and Medicare and supports a nationwide ban on abortion. He authored 3 bills to do exactly that. I think what's important to recognize here, a lot of members, while some of those moderate Republicans from New York were voting for Mike Johnson, you might have heard a few Democrats on the Democratic side say bye-bye. And that's because these people are sitting in Biden-won districts and yet just voted to support someone who, again, wants to ban abortion nationwide. If you're running in a Biden-won district and you just cast your ballot for somebody whose position is that there should be no abortion anywhere in the country, I'm going to read you a tweet that Mike Johnson tweeted here. Breaking. Late yesterday, the Louisiana Department of Health informed abortion facilities in our state that the right to life has now been restored. Perform an abortion and get imprisoned at hard labor for 1 to 10 years and fined $10,000 to $100,000. That is what Mike Johnson is supporting here. That's his position, espousing the virtues of hard labor imprisonment for women who seek to get an abortion in the state. That is exactly who these people just supported when they cast their ballot for him. Again, he also introduced a nationwide Don't Say Gay law in the mold of what Ron DeSantis supported down in Florida. He supported a nationwide ban on abortion, wants to end Social Security and Medicare, voted to overturn the 2020 election. So as far right as you could possibly imagine, that is who Mike Johnson is. So we have a year left of this. As I mentioned before in the pre-show, there are a number of not only Biden-won districts where Republicans are currently sitting, and that's 18, but don't forget also that we're currently looking at maps that are being redrawn in Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, Utah, New York, all for the express purpose of overturning illegal gerrymanders. So we could be looking at anywhere from 10 or 11 to 15 seats just on overturning illegal gerrymanders. So that right there, with a 5-seat majority in the House, is enough to flip the House from Republicans to Democrats, then add in those 18 Republicans currently sitting in Biden won districts, Democrats could be looking at a swing of 30 seats. So it's not like this guy is going to be speaker forever, right? But in the meantime, look at how much damage he can do by not only supporting this type of legislation, and who knows what can happen in 2024 if the Republicans do have some type of a wave election, or if turnout is low among Democrats. You have somebody who was the architect of nationwide bans on abortion, who can definitely bring some of that legislation up for a vote. And if Democrats are able to retake government, then that would pass from a nationwide level. So just to kind of like put on full display the blinking red light that comes from electing someone like Mike Johnson, as extreme as he is. It also puts into doubt what he'll do, in terms of accepting any election results. Again, he was one of the architects for Trump's scheme to ignore the vote certifications in Congress. So as dangerous as it gets in terms of someone who these Republicans could have chosen, and you have these 18 Republicans sitting in Biden won districts right now, all of whom cast their ballots for this guy, and that's going to be an albatross around their necks when it comes time to actually vote this coming November, or next November rather. So, these votes are going to hang on them for a long time. And I think if we just have a few months here, it'll become apparent to everyone the extent of the extremism for someone like Mike Johnson. With that said, we're still waiting for him to come back into the chamber. In the meantime, I would ask for anybody who's watching right now, if you enjoy my coverage or the analysis that will come after this is all done or before here, please subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything. It's the best way to support what I do, and I'd very much appreciate it. Beyond these live streams, I also do breaking news coverage. I do an interview series. Last week I interviewed Jamie Raskin. The week before was AOC. I've interviewed President Biden. I also host a legal series with Glenn Kirshner, and where we talk about everything that's happening, especially with regard to the prosecutions that Donald Trump is facing right now, and a voting rights series with Mark Elias, where again we speak in depth about all of these maps and these gerrymanders that are being overturned. He's the lead attorney overseeing a lot of these cases. So again, we are a few minutes out here from Mike Johnson coming back into the chamber and taking his seat at the top of the dais here. So we're just a few minutes out. For those asking if the rule to vacate the speaker is still in place or was it changed, I believe unless they change the rules, then it's still in place. So, and for those asking, well, why won't Democrats just introduce a motion to vacate? Because then we'll just see another vote like this one. If Republicans have the majority and they are united behind Mike Johnson, then even if there's a motion to vacate and they do they'll do a vote first to see if he'll be ousted, and it will fail, and that's it. So while the motion to vacate is still in place, if there is united support from the entire Republican conference, then it won't really matter. In the meantime, if you have questions, you can throw them in the chat. I'll do my best to answer them. And again, to be able to participate in the chat, all you have to do is subscribe. Subscribers can partake in the chat. It costs you nothing to be able to do that.
And you're watching live coverage of the new speaker and his swearing-in ceremony, which is coming up in just a minute. Mike Johnson, Republican, Louisiana, been in Congress since first elected in 2016. He's on the Armed Services and Judiciary Committees currently. He will be taken off those committees after he becomes Speaker. And the swearing in will happen, and potentially the House will do some business. But if they don't, we will be here to get your reaction to the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, the first Louisianian to become Speaker.
For those asking about a little bit of his positions, we got the question, is he bipartisan? No, Mike Johnson is about as extreme a Republican as you could possibly find. Again, authored nationwide abortion ban legislation, was the lead architect in Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the election in the House. He wants to ban abortion nationwide, opposes the legalization of same-sex marriage. That's a position that Republicans have in 2023, opposing same-sex marriage. And I'm sure you can continue to guess the rest. He wants to end Social Security and Medicare, authored a nationwide Don't Say Gay law. So again, as extreme as it gets in terms of what Mike Johnson's positions are. If a national abortion ban passed the House, wouldn't the Senate need to also pass it for it to become law? Yes, but it shows A, what the Republicans' priorities are moving forward, and B, if the Republicans are able to gain a majority in the Senate and the White House in 2024 and keep this majority in the House, then it looks like they would have support in all three branches to be able to pass some type of a nationwide abortion ban. And remember, there is a rough map for Democrats ahead coming into the Senate. The House map is definitely better for Democrats because, again, as I mentioned, we have a number of Republicans sitting in Biden won districts, and we also have a number of maps being redrawn to undo illegal gerrymanders. But in the meantime, we're defending seats. The Democrats are defending seats in Montana, in West Virginia, in Ohio, in Arizona, in Pennsylvania. Not a great map for Democrats as far as the Senate's concerned. Our offensive opportunities in the Senate are Florida and Texas, just to give you an indication of how rough that map actually is. So, of course, they would need the House, the Senate, and the White House to be able to pass any legislation, but this is a harbinger of things to come if Democrats aren't able to hold on to control of any of those branches here. And for those saying that would seem to undermine the states' rights position that Republicans pretend to espouse, you'd be right. It was never about states' rights. It was always about abortion, banning abortion nationwide. The second that Roe was overturned, the first thing that happened was Republicans introduced a nationwide abortion ban in Congress. So it was never about leaving it up to the states. It was always just about usurping women's rights and kind of imposing their theocratic agenda onto everyone else. All right, here we go. I think he's going to be sworn in right now.
The House will come to order. Sergeant of Arms.
Mr. Speaker, the Speaker-elect Mike Johnson from the state of Louisiana.
Of course, Lauren Boebert is taking selfies because it's all about her social media clout.
All right. The House will come to order.
Speaker Mike Johnson, Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, Whip Clark, Chairman Aguilar, all of my colleagues in government on both sides of the aisle, it's an honor and a privilege to once again stand before you as House Democratic leader. From the very beginning of this Congress, House Democrats have made clear that we will find bipartisan common ground with our Republican colleagues whenever and wherever possible, for the good of the American people. And House Democrats have repeatedly done just that. It was House Democrats who provided a majority of the votes necessary to avoid a catastrophic default on our debt that would have crashed the U.S. economy and triggered a job-killing recession. It was House Democrats who provided a majority of the votes necessary to avoid a government shutdown that would have hurt everyday American. It was House Democrats who provided a majority of the votes necessary to secure $16 billion in disaster assistance for Americans whose lives have been devastated by extreme weather events. From the very beginning of this Congress, House Democrats have been governing for the people. We continue to look forward to finding bipartisan common ground whenever and wherever possible. House Democrats will continue to partner with President Biden and Senate Democrats to put people over politics. House Democrats will continue to fight for lower costs, better paying jobs, safer communities, and to build an economy from the middle out and the bottom up and not the top down. House Democrats will continue to push back against extremism in this chamber and throughout the country. House Democrats will continue to protect Social Security, protect Medicare, protect Medicaid, protect our children, protect our climate, protect low-income families, protect working families, protect the middle class, protect organized labor, protect the LGBTQ community, protect our veterans, protect older Americans, protect the Affordable Care Act, protect the right to vote, protect the peaceful transfer of power, protect our democracy, and protect a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions. These are blue lines in the sand, and we will work hard to make sure that they are never crossed. We must also continue to stand by President Biden as he works to bring American hostages and Israeli hostages held by Hamas back home. American hostages and Israeli hostages and international hostages back home. We must also stand by our friends on the international stage. And we have no better friend in the Middle East than the State of Israel. Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state, The special relationship between the United States and Israel is unbreakable. Our commitment to Israel's security is ironclad, and Israel has a right to defend itself under the international rules of war against the brutal terror unleashed on its citizens by Hamas. Our ironclad commitment to Israel's security and the effort to defeat Hamas is not inconsistent with the goal of achieving a lasting and just peace between Israel and the Palestinian people. In many ways, it is a necessary ingredient because Hamas is not good for Israel. Hamas is not good for America. Hamas is not good for the free world. Hamas is not good for the democratic aspirations of the Palestinian people. We must also support Ukraine in its courageous effort to defeat Russian aggression. There are only two paths in front of us. We can either stand up for Ukraine or bow down to Vladimir Putin. That is not a difficult choice. We must stand up for America's national security. We must stand up for democracy. We must stand up for freedom. We must stand up for truth. We must stand up for the Ukrainian people until victory is won. It is my expectation that in the next week or so, the Senate will send over for consideration a bipartisan national security funding package for Israel, Ukraine, and our other allies throughout the free world. That also includes humanitarian assistance for Palestinian civilians and others who may be in harm's way. The House of Representatives should take up this national security package and humanitarian relief package immediately, in totality, and without delay. The time for gamesmanship is over. The time for brinksmanship is over. The time for partisanship is over. It's time to get back to doing the business of the American people. Let me conclude. Let me conclude with an observation about the state of our democracy. Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential election. He's doing a great job under difficult circumstances, and no amount of election denialism will ever change that reality. Not now, not ever. Throughout the years, presidents from Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama, Dwight Eisenhower to Lyndon Baines Johnson, have spoken to this chamber and urged us to put aside partisan politics for the good of the American people. President Lincoln spoke to this Congress on December 1st, 1862, in the middle of the Civil War, and noted that we in this institution had the power and bore the responsibility to save the Union. The stakes were high. As articulated by President Lincoln, we could either nobly save or meanly lose America as we know it, the last best hope on earth. This is a turbulent time in the American journey, and we have but one charge to keep during this moment of great fragility. Our union must be sustained. Our union must be strengthened. Our union must succeed. There are many throughout this country who are understandably alarmed at the turbulence of the moment, at the chaos, the dysfunction, and the extremism that has been unleashed in this chamber from the very beginning of this Congress. But this too shall pass. Our country has often confronted adversity, and the good news is we always find a way to make it to the other side. We faced adversity in the 1860s, in the middle of the Civil War, when the country was literally tearing itself apart. We faced adversity in October of 1929, when the stock market collapsed, plunging us into a Great Depression. We faced adversity in December of 1941, when a foreign power unexpectedly struck, plunging us into a world war with the evil empire of Nazi Germany. We faced adversity in the Deep South in the 1950s and 60s, when the country was struggling to reconcile the inherent contradictions between Jim Crow segregation and the glorious promises of the Constitution. We faced adversity on September 11th, 2001, when the towers and the Pentagon were unexpectedly struck, killing thousands of lives in an instant. We faced adversity right here in the House of Representatives, when on January 6, 2021, a violent mob of insurrectionists, incited by some in this chamber, overran the House floor as part of an effort to halt the peaceful transfer of power. Every time we faced adversity, the good news here in America is that we always overcome. That is the power of American exceptionalism. That is why America is the land of the free and the home of the brave. That is why I remain optimistic about the future of this country. That is why America is the last best hope on earth. God bless you. God bless the House of Representatives. God bless the United States of America.
Tell you what, he's a good speaker. Damn.
It is now my solemn honor and responsibility to hand over the People's Gavel here in the United States House of Representatives to a family man, a hardworking man, a Baptist man, a Southern man, a son of a firefighter's household, the gentleman from the great state of Louisiana, and the 56th Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, the Honorable Mike Johnson.
Arguably one of the most dangerous and extreme speakers that we'll have in our history. One of the most dangerous and extreme speakers in American history.
Thank you. Thank you all. First, a few words of gratitude. I want to thank Leader Jeffries. I do look forward to working with you on behalf of the American people. I know we see things from very different points of view, but I know that in your heart you love and care about this country and you want to do what's right. And so we're going to find common ground there, all right? I want to express my great thanks for our Speaker Emeritus, Kevin McCarthy. Kevin has dedicated over 2 decades of his life to selfless public service, 16 of those years in this House. And you would be hard-pressed to find anybody who
selfless public
loves
service.
this institution more or has contributed more to it. He is the reason we're in this majority today.
No, gerrymandering is the reason they're in the majority. And the number of those maps have already been overturned in the next cycle.
His impact can never be overstated, and I want to thank him for his leadership, his friendship, and the selfless sacrifice that you and Judy have made for so many years. You helped build it, Kevin, and we owe you a great debt of gratitude. I want to thank the dedicated and overworked staff of this beleaguered House. They accept praise so stoically. But Miss Susan Cole, our House reading clerk, and yes. Listen, all the clerks and all the staff, you know, they're terribly overworked. This has been a grueling process, but they have served an integral role in keeping our republic, and we thank them for that service. I know we all do. I want to thank my dedicated wife of almost 25 years, Kelly. She's not here. We couldn't get a flight in time. This happened sort of suddenly. But we're going to celebrate soon. She spent the last couple of weeks on her knees in prayer to the Lord, and she's a little worn out. We all are. I want to thank our children, Michael and Hannah and Abby and Jack and Will. All of our children sacrifice. All of them do, and we know that. And there's not a lot of perks to being a member of Congress's kid, right? And so I want to thank all of your families as well for what they endure and what they've had to endure for the last few weeks. We've been here a while. Yeah. I want to thank my faithful mother, Jeannie Johnson, who bore me at the age of 17, and my brothers Chris and Josh, and my sister Laura, and all their families, and all of our extended family. In Louisiana, family's a big deal, and we got a bunch of them. I especially want to thank all the extraordinary people of the great state of Louisiana. We have never had a Speaker of the House hail from our state, and so they've been lifting us up. I thank the people of Louisiana for the opportunity to serve you in Congress, and I'm humbled by your continuous support. We will make you proud. To my colleagues, I want to thank you all for the trust that you have instilled in me to lead us in this historic and unprecedented moment that we're in. The challenge before us is great, but the time for action is now, and I will not let you down. I want to say to the American people, on behalf of all of us here, we hear you. We know the challenges you're facing. We know that there's a lot going on in our country, domestically and abroad, and we are ready to get to work again to solve those problems, and we will. Our mission here is to serve you well, to restore the people's faith in this House, in this great and essential institution. My dad, it was mentioned, my dad was a firefighter. He was an assistant chief in the fire department in my hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana, a little town in northwest Louisiana. On September 17, 1984, when I was 12 years old, he was critically burned and permanently disabled in the line of duty. All I ever wanted to be when I grew up was the chief of the fire department in Shreveport. But after the explosion on that fateful day, he nearly died, and it was a long road back, and it changed all of our life trajectories. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. And my dad, he lived with pain all the rest of his life for decades more. And I lost my dad to cancer 3 days before I got elected to Congress, 3 days. And he wanted to be there at my election night so badly. I'm the first college graduate in my family. This was a big deal to him. And so it was several weeks after that. It was early 2017. It was my freshman term, and it fell to me to be in the rostrum one night to serve here as Speaker Pro Tem. I thought that was a big deal until I figured out that's what you do for freshmen late at night. And I think if my memory serves, Miss Jackson Lee was winding down one of her long, eloquent speeches. And not that I was not enraptured by her speech, but I looked up at the top of the chamber there, and I saw the face of Moses staring down. And I just felt in that moment the weight of this place, right? The history that is revered here and the future that we are called to forge. And I really was just kind of almost overwhelmed with emotion. It occurred to me in that moment, it had been several weeks, and I had not had an opportunity yet to grieve my dad's passing, and I just had this sense that somehow he knew. And I had tears come to my eyes, and I was standing here, and I'm wiping them away, and then it suddenly occurs to me, the late-night C-SPAN viewers are going to think something's very wrong with the new young congressman from Louisiana. It wasn't Sheila's speech. I'm sorry. I just knew in that moment that my dad, my father, would be proud of me, and I felt that he was. And I think all of our parents are proud of what we're called to do here. I think all the American people at one time had great pride in this institution, but right now, that's in jeopardy. And we have a challenge before us right now to rebuild and restore that trust. This is a beautiful country. It's the beauty of America that allows a firefighter's kid like me to come here and serve in this sacred chamber where great men and women have served before all of us and strive together to build and then preserve what Lincoln did refer to as the last best hope of man on earth. We stand at a very dangerous time. I'm stating the obvious. We all know that. The world is in turmoil. But a strong America is good for the entire world. We are the beacon of freedom, and we must preserve this grand experiment in self-governance. It still is. We're only 247 years into this grand experiment. We don't know how long it will last, but we do know that the founders told us to take good care of it. I want to tell all my colleagues here what I told the Republicans in that room last night. I don't believe there are any coincidences in a matter like this. I believe that Scripture, the Bible, is very clear. That God is the one that raises up those in authority. He raised up each of you, all of us. And I believe that God has ordained and allowed each one of us to be brought here for this specific moment in this time. This is my belief. I believe that each one of us has a huge responsibility today to use the gifts that God has given us to serve the extraordinary people of this great country, and they deserve it, and to ensure that our republic remains standing as the great beacon of light and hope and freedom in a world that desperately needs it. It was in 1962 that our national motto, "In God We Trust," was adorned above this rostrum. And if you look at the little guide that they give tourists and constituents who come and visit the house, if you turn in there to about page 14 in the middle of that guide, it tells you the history of this. And it says very simply, these words were placed here above us. This motto was placed here as a rebuke of the Cold War era philosophy of the Soviet Union. That philosophy was Marxism and communism, which begins with the premise that there is no God. This is a critical distinction that is also articulated in our nation's birth certificate. We know the language well, the famous second paragraph that we used to have children memorize in school, and they don't do that so often anymore, but they should. G.K. Chesterton was the famous British philosopher and statesman, and he said one time, America is the only nation in the world that is founded upon a creed. And he said it's listed with almost theological lucidity in the Declaration of Independence. What is our creed?
Shoved down our throats
We
right
hold
now.
these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, not born equal, created equal. And they are endowed by the same inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That is the creed that has animated our nation since its founding, that has made us the great nation that we are. And we're in a time of extraordinary crisis right now. And the world needs us to be strong. They need us to remember our creed and our admonition. Turmoil and violence have rocked the Middle East and Eastern Europe. We all know it. And tensions continue to build in the Indo-Pacific. The country demands strong leadership of this body and we must not waver. Our nation's greatest ally in the Middle East is under attack. The first bill that I'm going to bring to this floor in just a little while will be in support of our dear friend Israel, and we're overdue in getting that done. We're going to show not only Israel, but the entire world that the barbarism of Hamas that we have all seen play out on our television screens is wretched and wrong, and we are going to stand for the good in that conflict. We have a catastrophe at our southern border. The Senate and the White House can no longer ignore the problem. From Texas to New York, wave after wave of illegal migrants are stressing our communities to their breaking points. We know that our streets are being flooded with fentanyl, and all of our communities, children, and even adults are dying from it. The status quo is unacceptable. Inaction is unacceptable, and we must come together and address the broken border. We have to do it. The skyrocketing cost of living is unsustainable, and Americans should not have to worry about how they're going to feed their family every week because they can't afford their groceries anymore. Everybody in this room should think about this. Here's the stats. Prices have increased over 17% in the last 2 years. Credit card interest rates are at the highest level in nearly 3 decades, and mortgage rates are now at a peak we haven't seen since 2001. We have to bring relief to the American people by reining in federal spending and bringing down inflation. The greatest threat to our national security is our nation's debt. And while we've been sitting in this room, that's right, the debt has crossed almost $33.6 trillion. In the time that it's going to take me to deliver this speech, we'll go up another $20 million in debt. It's unsustainable. We have to get
the irony being that when Republicans had full control of government, they added almost $8 trillion to the debt. Only a problem when the Democrats president.
But the consequences, if we don't act now, are unbearable. We have a duty to the American people to explain this to them so they understand it well. And we are going to establish a bipartisan debt commission to begin working on this crisis immediately. We all know that we also live in a time of bitter partisanship. It was noted, and it's been on display here today, right? When our people are losing their faith in government, when they're losing sight of the principles that made us the greatest nation in the history of the world, I think we got to be mindful of that. We're going to fight. We're going to fight vigorously over our core principles because they're at odds a lot of times now in this modern era. We have to sacrifice sometimes our preferences because that's what's necessary in a legislative body. But we will defend our core principles to the end. In his farewell address, thank you. In his farewell address, President Reagan explained the secret of his rapport with people. And I like to paraphrase his explanation all the time. He said, you know, they call me the great communicator, but I really wasn't that. He said, I was just communicating great things. And they're the same great things that have guided our nation since its founding. What are those great things? I call them the 7 core principles of American conservatism, but let me concede to you all, I think it's really quintessentially the core principles of our nation. I boil them down to individual freedom, limited government, the rule of law, peace through strength, fiscal responsibility, free markets, and human dignity. Those are the foundations that made us the extraordinary nation that we are.
This guy's there. The Law and Order Party is there because he's there at the approval of Donald Trump, who's currently sitting in a courtroom in New York.
Most successful nation in the history of the world. The things that have made us truly exceptional. In this time of great crisis, it is our duty to work together, as previous generations of great leaders have, to face these great challenges and solve these great problems. I will conclude with this. The job of the Speaker of the House is to serve the whole body, and I will. But I've made a commitment to my colleagues here that this Speaker's office is going to be known for decentralizing the power here. My office is going to be known for members being more involved and having more influence in our processes and all the major decisions that are made here, for predictable processes and regular order. We owe that to the people. That's right. And I want to make this commitment to you, to my colleagues here and on the other side of the aisle as well. My office is going to be known for trust and transparency and accountability, for good stewardship of the people's treasure, for the honesty and integrity that is incumbent upon us, all of us, here in the People's House. Our system of government is not a perfect system. It's got a lot of challenges, but it is still the best one in the world, and we have an opportunity to preserve it. Last thing I'm going to say is a message to the rest of the world. They have been watching this drama play out for a few weeks. We've learned a lot of lessons, but you know what? Through adversity, it makes you stronger. And we want our allies around the world to know that this body of lawmakers is reporting again to our duty stations. Let the enemies of freedom around the world hear us loud and clear. The People's House is back in business.
Except
Thank you.
Putin.
Thank you.
That's totally fine as far as they're concerned, because these people will not approve any Ukraine aid. So you can be enemies of freedom, but not enemies of freedom that are also in bed with the Republican Party.
We will do our duty here. We will serve you well. We will govern well, and we'll make you proud in this institution again. We're going to fight every day to make sure that is true. I look forward to the days ahead. I genuinely believe in my heart that the best days of America are still ahead of us. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you. Thank you. I'm now ready to take the oath of office, and I ask the Dean of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Harold Rogers of Kentucky, to please administer the oath of office.
Mr. Speaker Designee, congratulations on your election.
Thank you, sir.
When our founding fathers chose a bold, new, and innovative new self-rule government, it was met by deep skepticism by the world's monarchs. They said self-rule is only a dream. Our founders said, they're right. It's the American dream.
Amen.
Now it's our dream. We're in charge. The speakership of the United States House of Representatives is the crucial outpost for the well-being of the people's government, the keeper, if you will, of the dream. Sir, if you wish to assume this awesome responsibility, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you are about to enter. So help you God?
I do, so help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Get the next. Would y'all like to get right into governing? For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, that is a nice ring to it, by the way. Mr. Speaker, I offer a privilege resolution to notify the Senate of the election of Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House of Representatives and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 810. Resolve that a message be sent to the Senate to inform that body that Mike Johnson, a representative from the state of Louisiana, has been elected Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to, and the motion to consider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, to notify President Biden of the election of Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House, I offer a privilege resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 811. Resolve that the clerk be instructed to inform the President of the United States that the House of Representatives has elected Mike Johnson, a representative from the state of Louisiana, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Thank you. All right. The chair would take this occasion to note that the Speaker's announced policies with respect to particular aspects of the legislative process placed in the record on January 9, 2023 will continue in effect for the remainder of the 118th Congress. The chair announces that the Speaker has delivered to the clerk a letter dated October 25, 2023, listing members in the order in which each shall act as Speaker pro tempore under Clause 8B3 of Rule 1. The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives. I hereby designate Representative Steve Scalise to exercise any authority regarding assembly, reassembly, convening, or reconvening of the House pursuant to House Concurrent Resolution 1, Clause 12 of Rule 1, and any concurrent resolution of the concurrent Congress as may contemplate my designation of members to exercise similar authority. In the event of the death or inability of that designee, the alternate members of the House listed in the letter bearing this date that I have placed with the clerk are designated in turn for the same purpose. Signed sincerely, Mike Johnson, Speaker.
The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable Kevin F. McCumber, Clerk of the House, Washington, D.C. Mr. Clerk, I hereby appoint the Honorable Patrick McHenry, the Honorable Adrian Smith, the Honorable Andy Harris, the Honorable Guy Reschenthaler, the Honorable Rob Whitman, the Honorable Ben Klein, the Honorable Richard Hudson, and the Honorable John Joyce to act as Speaker pro tempore to sign and roll bills and joint resolutions through the remainder of the 118th Congress. Signed sincerely, Mike Johnson, Speaker.
Without objection, the appointments are approved, and the House will be in recess subject to a call of chair pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1. We'll be back soon. Nothing. Yep. There we go.
Okay. So, that's it. The Speaker has been elected. That is Mike Johnson. Just to give you an idea for those wondering who Mike Johnson is, if you've been following along or if you're just not aware of exactly who this guy is, he was the lead architect in Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. He led that 2020 amicus brief in Texas that would overturn the election results in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Michigan. That's how you really know these people are down with states' rights, because there was a lawsuit in one state that sought to overturn the election results in another state because they weren't happy with how that state voted, because states' rights is one of their most dearly
Mike
held
Johnson on
principles.
Capitol
That's how
Hill
you know
and
they
throughout America
really
as he
care about
seems
that stuff.
poised to
He
grab
is
the
also a
Speaker's
vehement
gavel.
opponent of
After
abortion
3
rights. Let me
weeks
just
of
read you a
chaos
tweet
in the House,
that Mike
the
Johnson
updated
posted,
headline
and
says
this was
that
in the
this
immediate
election of
aftermath
Mike
of
Johnson
abortion being
is
outlawed in
historic. The
Louisiana.
first Louisianan
Breaking! Late yesterday,
to
the
be elected. He's a
Louisiana Department of Health
graduate of
informed abortion facilities in our state that, let me go full screen here, informed abortion facilities in our state that the right to life has now been restored, perform an abortion, and get imprisoned at hard labor for 1 to 10 years and fined $10,000 to $100,000. That is the Speaker of the Republican House. That is second in line to the presidency. That's the person that the Republican Party has elevated to the highest position in their party. Someone who just extolled the virtues of hard labor for getting an abortion. And that is in the immediate aftermath of the American people coming out in state after state, even deep red states like Kentucky and Ohio, coming out and voting against these Republican efforts to overturn abortion rights. So this is the person that Republicans have elevated to the highest position in their government. This is them placing a line in the sand. This is the hill they're willing to die on. That Republicans' position here is that women should be sentenced to hard labor if they get abortions. In case you were wondering where the GOP stands, even in light of all of these elections showing that Americans are so far out of favor with Republican position on abortion. He's also far right on other issues like same-sex marriage. Again, the reason that Tom Emmer wasn't a suitable candidate for Republicans as far as Speaker is concerned is because he committed the crime of supporting same-sex marriage or not opposing same-sex marriage now in the year 2023. So it is 2023. They now have a speaker who opposes the right to same-sex marriage, and that is their position on that issue. Again, another issue that Republicans are vastly out of favor with compared with the majority of Americans. So on issue after issue after issue, this is one of, if not the farthest right Republican. This is who they've elevated to become the speaker of their party. This is the message that they're sending to Americans ahead of 2024, that where they stand on abortion is that women should be sentenced to hard labor if they seek one, that Americans who are currently in same-sex marriages shouldn't have that right, and that if Americans vote for a certain candidate who is not the candidate that Republicans want, that they should not have the right to have that candidate represent them in office, not have that politician represent them in office. So on issue after issue after issue, that is where the Republicans have laid their markers in the sand, and I think it'll become clear very soon just how extreme Mike Johnson is. He may not have the name recognition, the name ID that Jim Jordan has, the name recognition that Donald Trump has, but make no mistake, he is just as, if not more extreme than these people. And we saw a small sampling of that Christo-fascist, that theocratic agenda that he wants to impose onto everybody else by virtue of how he seeks to lead this House. So that'll become abundantly clear, I think, in the coming days and weeks and months here. But with that said, a lot of these Republicans who did cast their ballots for this guy, they're going back to districts that Joe Biden won in 2020. And so, for these Mike Lawlers and Molineros and D'Espositos, now they just voted for a guy, and they have this on their record, voting for a guy who thinks that abortion should be banned nationally, who thinks that Americans who are in same-sex marriages shouldn't have the right to remain in those marriages, who believe that, Joe Biden didn't win the 2020 election. That's the position that these Republicans now in Biden districts have put themselves on record supporting. So that'll just be another element in their uphill battle for re-election here. And make no mistake, all of these Democrats who are going to be running against those Republicans in those districts are paying attention right now and are going to make sure that every single voter in their district knows the kind of person that those people just elevated to become speaker. Again, someone who opposes same-sex marriage, opposes abortion, opposes a free and fair election. So again, the extremism is going to be on full display, I think, in the coming weeks and months here as Republicans kind of regain their majority here and have elected a speaker. With that said, for anybody watching who enjoyed the pre-show or the regular analysis during or this post-show analysis, I would definitely ask you, if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, to please subscribe. It's the best way to support what I do, and it doesn't cost you anything. I'll do live streams like this one. Anytime there are debates or votes or anything like that, I'll make sure to live stream them. I do breaking news coverage on a daily basis. I do interviews every single week. This past week was Jamie Raskin. Last week was AOC. The weeks before that have been everybody from Joe Biden to Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, and on and on. I do a legal series with Glenn Kirshner where we cover everything with regard to Donald Trump's prosecutions right now in all the different jurisdictions, and a voting rights series called Democracy Watch with Mark Elias, the nation's top voting rights attorney. And we've discussed all of the maps that are being overturned right now that are illegal gerrymanders that Republicans have put in place. Again, we can expect anywhere from 10 to 15 seats being flipped to the Democrats in 2024 just by virtue of maps being redrawn that were illegally gerrymandered ahead of this election here. So, a lot to look forward to in the channel. So again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe. And for those who've watched throughout the entirety of this process, the doom loop that we've been stuck in as Republicans tried to do the bare minimum in terms of governing, thank you for watching along. I know there's a lot of different options in terms of where you can get your news, so I appreciate you watching. With that said, thank you so much. Thank you to those who've contributed as well. I definitely appreciate it. So thank you. And again, I'll be back for the next one. Thanks so much.